Hey there, wonderful viewers. If you're enjoying my content, please take a second to hit that like button. It really helps the YouTube algorithm show my videos to more people. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Now grab your favorite drink, sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. I promise it'll be worth your time. I've always considered myself a rational person. Growing up in Arizona's scorching heat, I spent most of my time indoors, reading books about science and history, rather than playing outside with other kids. My grandfather, my mother's father, was indigenous, making me about 1/4 Native American, though not Navajo. He tried sharing stories from his culture when I was young, tales of spirits and entities that walked between worlds. I'd smile politely but never believed them. They were just stories meant to teach lessons or explain natural phenomena to people who didn't have access to scientific knowledge. That changed in the summer of 2018. I was 26 then, working as a technical writer for a software company in Phoenix. The job paid well but left me restless and unfulfilled. I needed something different in my life, some adventure, some mystery. That's when I reconnected with Jasper. Jasper and I had been close in high school but drifted apart during college. When we found each other again through social media, we quickly picked up where we'd left off. Jasper had always been interested in cryptozoology, paranormal investigations, and occult practices. I used to tease him mercilessly about it. "Show me proof," I'd say, "and then I'll believe." One night, over beers at a downtown Phoenix bar, Jasper told me about places in Arizona where strange things happened. Not tourist traps or known haunted locations, but remote areas where people experienced unexplainable phenomena. "There's more in this world than what science can explain," he insisted. "I've seen things that changed how I view reality." I remained skeptical, but intrigued. The idea of investigating these locations appealed to my growing desire for adventure. So when Jasper suggested we start exploring these sites together, I agreed. It began as weekend trips to abandoned mines and remote desert locations, places with reports of unusual lights or sounds. Most outings yielded nothing but disappointment and sunburn. Then came the night at Antelope Canyon. It was just Jasper and me, with permission from a local guide to stay after tourist hours. We'd set up recording equipment, hoping to capture something, anything, that might suggest paranormal activity. Around midnight, our equipment failed simultaneously. Batteries drained, recorders stopped working, and both our phones died despite being fully charged. And then we heard it, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to vibrate through the rock itself. It grew louder, making my ears pop painfully. Jasper grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. A blue light appeared at the end of the narrow passage, pulsing in time with the sound. It wasn't coming from outside. It emanated from within the rock walls. We ran. That's the truth. We abandoned our equipment and ran like terrified children to our car. Neither of us spoke as we drove back to Phoenix that night. The following day, when we retrieved our equipment, everything worked perfectly. The recordings contained nothing but static. That experience changed something fundamental in me. I couldn't explain what we'd witnessed, but I couldn't deny it either. For the first time, I understood what Jasper meant. Some experiences exist beyond scientific explanation. Over the next several months, Jasper introduced me to his circle of like-minded friends. Andre, tall, soft-spoken, with an encyclopedic knowledge of regional folklore. Nolan, ex-military, pragmatic, always prepared with emergency supplies and first aid. Together, we formed an informal investigation group, exploring locations with reported paranormal activity across Arizona. Most of our outings yielded nothing concrete. Strange sounds that could be explained by wildlife, unusual lights that might be distant vehicles or atmospheric phenomena. But occasionally, we'd experience something truly inexplicable. Objects, moving without cause, voices captured on recordings when no one was present, shadowy figures glimpsed in peripheral vision. I began researching indigenous beliefs about the supernatural, reconnecting with aspects of my heritage I'd previously dismissed. My grandfather had passed years ago, but his stories returned to me with new significance, particularly his warnings, about certain places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where entities neither human nor animal might cross over. By September 2018, I'd gone from steadfast skeptic to cautious believer, but nothing in our previous investigations prepared me for what happened near Flagstaff. The camping trip was Jasper's idea. He'd been researching an area north of Flagstaff, with a history of unusual sightings, hikers reporting disorientation, missing time, and glimpses of tall figures observing them from between trees. Most of these accounts came from online forums and local rumors rather than official reports, but the consistency of the descriptions intrigued us. We should spend a weekend there, Jasper suggested during one of our regular meetings at my apartment. Set up camp, do some night observations, see if there's anything to these stories. Andre immediately agreed. He'd been wanting to test his new night vision equipment, expensive gear he'd purchased with his recent inheritance. Nolan was more hesitant. Those woods are different from our usual spots, he warned. Harder to navigate, easier to get lost, and if something goes wrong, help is far away. His caution was justified. Most of our previous investigations involved abandoned buildings or desert locations with clear escape routes. Dense forest presented different challenges and potential dangers. That's why we need you, I told Nolan. You're the survival expert. Flattery worked. Nolan agreed, but with conditions. We'd bring proper camping gear, extra supplies, and weapons for protection against both wildlife and potential human threats. I had my Mosin Nagant rifle, a World War II relic inherited from my father that I'd learned to shoot reasonably well. Nolan would bring his hunting knife and pistol. We're not hunting Bigfoot, Jasper joked. Just observing. Better to have protection and not need it, Nolan replied grimly. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I researched the area, studying maps and reading accounts from hikers. The location was about 20 miles north of Flagstaff, accessible by a series of Forest Service roads that became progressively less maintained the further one traveled. There were no designated campgrounds, just dispersed camping areas used by hunters and hardcore outdoors enthusiasts. Jasper compiled the reported sightings, creating a crude map marking their approximate locations. A pattern emerged. Most occurred within a 3-mile radius centering on a particular ridge. That became our target zone. Andre focused on equipment, cameras with infrared capabilities, audio recorders, motion sensors, and his prized night vision goggles. Nolan handled the practical aspects: tent, sleeping bags, cooking supplies, first aid kit, and emergency communications. Initially, several other friends expressed interest in joining us. Hector, who'd accompanied us on a few urban explorations, Kira and Dominic, a couple who ran a small paranormal podcast, but as the weekend approached, one by one they dropped out. Hector came down with the flu. Kira and Dominic had a family emergency. Maybe it's for the best, Andre said when we finalized our plans. Smaller group means we can move more quietly, attract less attention. Attention from what? I asked. Andre shrugged. Whatever might be out there. The night before our departure, I had trouble sleeping. My dreams were fragmented, filled with images of dense forests and the sensation of being watched. I woke several times, sweating despite the air conditioning. By morning, I felt exhausted but strangely alert, my senses heightened by anticipation or anxiety. I couldn't tell which. We met at my apartment early Friday afternoon, loading our gear into Nolan's SUV. The trunk and back seat disappeared under tents, sleeping bags, coolers, equipment cases, and backpacks. My rifle, carefully wrapped and unloaded per regulations, went last. Everyone ready? Nolan asked as we settled into the vehicle. Last chance to back out. No one spoke. In the silence, I felt a momentary impulse to suggest postponing the trip. Something felt wrong, not about our preparations, but about the destination itself. The feeling passed quickly, dismissed as pre-adventure jitters. Let's go, I said finally. Flagstaff awaits. If I had listened to that instinct, perhaps what followed could have been avoided. But curiosity and the desire to understand drove us forward, toward an encounter that would permanently alter our perception of reality. The drive to Flagstaff normally takes about 2 hours from Phoenix, a straight shot up Interstate 17 as it climbs from the desert valley into the pine-covered mountains. We left Phoenix around noon, the temperature hovering near 105 degrees. By the time we reached Flagstaff 3 hours later, traffic had been unusually heavy. We'd watched the car thermometer drop to a pleasant 75. The dramatic change in environment always struck me as one of Arizona's most remarkable features. In just 140 miles, you transition from saguaro cacti and bare rock to dense pine forest and mountain meadows. It's like crossing into a different state, a different ecosystem entirely. We stopped in Flagstaff for supplies, extra batteries, ice for the coolers, additional food. The local outdoor store was busy with weekend warriors preparing for their own adventures. While Nolan discussed topographical maps with a clerk, I wandered the aisles examining tents and cooking equipment. Near the register, a bulletin board displayed notices about trail closures, wildlife sightings, and missing hikers. One flyer caught my attention, a warning about increased bear activity north of the city. Bears are highly territorial and can be aggressive if surprised, it cautioned. Make noise while hiking and store food properly. I took a photo of the notice with my phone to share with the others. As we left the store, I noticed an elderly indigenous man watching us from a bench across the street. His gaze seemed to follow our movements as we loaded supplies into the SUV. When I looked directly at him, he didn't avert his eyes but continued staring with an unnerving intensity. I nudged Jasper. "That man is watching us," I whispered. Jasper glanced over casually. "Maybe he recognizes your rifle case. Hunters are common up here." "I don't think that's it," I replied. But when I looked again, the bench was empty. The man had vanished without me noticing his departure. Back in the car, I mentioned the bear warning. Nolan nodded. "That's why we bring protection. But bears generally avoid humans unless they're protecting cubs or food sources. Or unless they're hungry," Andre added unhelpfully. We left Flagstaff around 4:30 p.m., following Highway 180 northwest before turning onto a series of increasingly rough Forest Service roads. Nolan drove carefully, navigating around potholes and exposed rocks. The trees grew denser, closing around us like a green tunnel. Cell service disappeared shortly after we left the highway. "GPS still working?" I asked Andre, who was monitoring our navigation. "For now," he replied, studying his tablet. "But the maps get less reliable out here. Some of these roads aren't even marked." The conversation dwindled as we focused on not getting lost. The forest around us seemed to swallow sound, creating an insulating bubble of silence broken only by the car's engine and the crunch of tires on gravel. I watched the trees pass by, their green uniformity occasionally broken by meadows or rock formations. Something about the landscape felt oppressive, as though the forest itself resented our intrusion. After nearly an hour on these back roads, we reached a crucial junction, a Y-shaped split where the road divided without any signage. The left path appeared more traveled, its surface smoother and wider. "Which way?" Nolan asked, stopping the vehicle. Andre consulted his tablet. "GPS is showing both paths reach our target area. Left looks easier on the vehicle." "Left it is," Nolan decided, turning the wheel. The left path wound deeper into the forest, climbing slightly as we continued north. Shadows lengthened as the afternoon waned toward evening. Without discussion, we all understood we needed to find a campsite soon. Setting up in darkness would be challenging and potentially dangerous. "There should be a clearing about half a mile ahead," Andre announced, squinting at his screen. Previous campers have marked it as suitable for vehicles. We continued forward, anticipation building. When we finally reached the supposed clearing, however, disappointment awaited. What had once been a viable camping area had become overgrown, with young pines reclaiming the space. The remnants of old fire rings were visible, but there wasn't enough room to comfortably set up our tent. "We could try to make it work," Jasper suggested without enthusiasm. Nolan shook his head. "Too cramped. Let's keep going. There must be better spots ahead." We drove another 15 minutes before finding a small pullout where we could park the SUV. By then, the sun had dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the ground. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and I was glad for the jacket I'd brought. "We'll have to search on foot from here," Nolan said, pulling a large backpack from the trunk. "Everyone grab essentials: water, flashlight, personal protection. We'll find a spot market, then come back for the camping gear." I retrieved my rifle, loading it carefully while the others prepared. The woods had grown quiet as twilight settled. That strange period when diurnal animals retreat and nocturnal ones haven't yet emerged. The silence felt unnatural, pregnant with anticipation. "Ready?" Nolan asked, shouldering his pack. We nodded, switched on our flashlights, and entered the forest. The transition from dusk to full darkness happened with surprising speed. One moment we could still see the natural contours of the land. The next, our world contracted to the beams of our flashlights cutting through absolute blackness. The forest canopy blocked even starlight, creating a darkness so complete it seemed tangible. We moved in a tight formation, Nolan leading, then Andre and Jasper, with me bringing up the rear, rifle at the ready. Our flashlights swept back and forth, revealing glimpses of the terrain, fallen logs, rocks, patches of undergrowth. The pine needles underfoot muffled our footsteps, creating the unsettling impression that we were floating rather than walking. "Look for level ground, away from dead trees," Nolan instructed. "Ideally with some natural windbreak." We walked for about 15 minutes, evaluating and rejecting several potential sites. One area seemed promising until Andre noticed bear scat nearby, fresh enough to warrant immediate retreat. Another spot had pooled water from recent rains, making it unsuitable for tents. The deeper we went, the more I felt a growing unease. It wasn't just the darkness or unfamiliar terrain. I'd experienced those before without this persistent sense of wrongness. Something about these woods felt different, as though the trees themselves were watching us, evaluating our intrusion. "Does anyone else feel?" I began, then hesitated, unsure how to articulate the sensation. "Like we're being observed?" Jasper finished for me. "Yeah, since we entered the tree line." Andre nodded in agreement. "It's not unusual in unfamiliar wilderness. Our brains are wired to detect potential threats. When we can't see clearly, imagination fills the gaps." His rational explanation should have comforted me. Instead, it felt inadequate, a convenient dismissal of something genuine. But I didn't press the issue. We continued our search, eventually reaching a small clearing that seemed ideal, relatively flat, sheltered by larger trees on three sides with no signs of animal activity or water issues. Nolan marked the location on his GPS unit. "This will work," he declared. "Let's head back and bring our gear." As we turned to retrace our steps, I noticed Jasper had stopped moving. He stood at the edge of the clearing, flashlight pointed into the dense trees, body rigid with attention. "Jasper?" I called. "What is it?" He didn't respond immediately. When he did finally turn, his expression was oddly vacant, eyes unfocused. "Did you say something?" he asked, blinking rapidly. "We're heading back to the car," Andre told him. "You okay?" "Yeah. Just thought I heard something." Jasper shook his head as though clearing it. "Probably a deer or something." We started back toward the SUV, moving faster now that we had a destination. About halfway there, I realized Jasper wasn't with us. Stopping abruptly, I turned and swept my flashlight back along our path. The beam caught him about 30 yards behind, standing motionless, facing away from us. "Jasper!" I called sharply. "What are you doing?" My voice seemed to snap him out of whatever trance had gripped him. He flinched, then jogged to catch up with us. "Sorry," he muttered. I only looked back for a second. Thought I saw something moving." "What kind of something?" Nolan asked, hand moving subtly toward his holstered pistol. Jasper shrugged. "Just movement. Probably nothing." We continued toward the car, maintaining closer formation. The sense of being watched intensified, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the mild temperature. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every shift of branches overhead commanded my immediate attention. When we finally reached the SUV, I felt a surge of relief so strong it was almost euphoric. The vehicle represented safety, normalcy, escape if needed. We quickly gathered our camping gear: tent, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, food supplies stored in odor-proof containers to avoid attracting wildlife. "Everyone take what you can carry," Nolan instructed. "We'll make multiple trips if necessary." Loaded with gear, we started back toward our chosen campsite. The extra weight made navigation more difficult, and our progress slowed considerably. About halfway there, Andre stumbled over an exposed root, dropping his portion of the tent poles with a clatter that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet forest. As the sound echoed, something responded, a distant cracking noise, like a heavy branch breaking under significant weight. We froze, listening intently. Another crack followed, then another, moving parallel to our position but keeping distance, as though something large was tracking us while remaining hidden. "Bear?" Andre whispered. Nolan shook his head slightly. "Bears are noisy when they move. This is too deliberate." "Could be hunters," Jasper suggested, though his tone indicated he didn't believe it. "At night? Without lights?" I questioned. We stood motionless for nearly a minute, straining to hear additional movement. When none came, Nolan gestured us forward. "Stay close. Make normal noise. We don't want to surprise anything." The rest of the journey passed without incident, though the sensation of being observed never diminished. At the clearing, we worked quickly to establish camp, setting up the tent, arranging sleeping areas, creating a small fire ring with stones collected from the perimeter. "No fire tonight," Nolan decided. "Too late, and we don't know what's in these woods." We ate a cold dinner of sandwiches and energy bars, speaking little. The forest around us had come alive with night sounds, distant owls, the rustle of small creatures in underbrush, the whispering passage of wind through pine needles. Normal sounds that should have been reassuring but somehow weren't. After eating, we secured our food in bear-resistant containers placed well away from the tent. Nolan established a watch rotation, 2 hours each, with me taking the first shift, then Andre, Jasper, and finally Nolan. "Wake the next person if you hear or see anything unusual," Nolan instructed. "And don't hesitate to wake everyone if necessary." The others retreated to the tent while I positioned myself at its entrance, rifle across my lap, flashlight ready. The night settled around me like a weighted blanket, heavy with anticipation. I strained my eyes against the darkness, identifying the shadowy outlines of trees, rocks, the irregular shape of our supply pile. Time passed with excruciating slowness. Every sound drew my attention. The whisper of wind, the occasional rustle of nocturnal animals, the subtle creaking of trees adjusting to temperature changes. Nothing seemed immediately threatening, yet the persistent feeling of being watched never diminished. Halfway through my watch, I heard it, a distinct rhythmic sound unlike the random noises of the forest. Footsteps heavy and measured, circling our campsite at a distance just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. I gripped my rifle tighter, finger resting alongside the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. The steps continued their circular pattern, neither approaching nor retreating. Whatever created them seemed content to maintain distance while establishing presence. I considered waking the others but hesitated. What would I say? That I heard footsteps but saw nothing? That didn't warrant disrupting everyone's rest. After perhaps 5 minutes, the footsteps stopped. The forest returned to its baseline nighttime sounds, but the sense of being observed intensified. Something was out there, watching, waiting, evaluating. When Andre emerged from the tent to relieve me, I hesitated before mentioning what I'd heard. His expression remained neutral as I described the footsteps. "Probably an elk," he suggested. "They're common in these forests and move at night." I nodded, accepting his explanation even though it didn't feel right. As I crawled into the tent, finding my place between Jasper and Nolan, I knew sleep would be elusive. Every sound from outside seemed amplified. The wind, distant animal calls, the rustling of Andre's clothing as he shifted position. Eventually, exhaustion overcame vigilance and I drifted into restless sleep. Dreams filled with shadowy figures moving between trees, always just beyond clear sight. I awoke to urgent whispering. Jasper and Nolan crouched near the tent entrance, their silhouettes visible against the pre-dawn grayness filtering through the fabric. "Can't have imagined it," Jasper was saying. "I know what I saw." "Keep your voice down," Nolan replied. "We don't want to wake—" "I'm already awake," I interrupted, sitting up. "What's happening?" Both men turned. Nolan's expression was guarded. Jasper's bordered on panic. "Something was watching us during my watch," Jasper explained, voice tight with suppressed fear. "Standing at the tree line, just observing." "What did it look like?" I asked, reaching for my boots. Taller than any person I've ever seen. Had to be 8 or 9 feet, just stood there perfectly still watching the tent. Jasper ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I flashed my light directly at it and it didn't move, didn't react. Just kept staring. "Why didn't you wake us?" Nolan asked, the edge in his voice suggesting this wasn't the first time he'd posed the question. Because by the time I got my wits together enough to consider it, the thing was gone, Jasper replied defensively, disappeared between one blink and the next. Andre stirred at the continued conversation, emerging from his sleeping bag with a confused expression. What's going on? Nolan quickly summarized Jasper's experience. Andre listened without interrupting, his usual skepticism notably absent. Could have been a tree playing tricks in the darkness, he suggested half-heartedly. It wasn't a fucking tree, Jasper snapped. I know what I saw. The tension in the tent thickened. Outside, birds had begun their morning calls, a jarringly normal soundtrack to our increasingly abnormal situation. Let's pack up, Nolan decided. Head back to the car and regroup. Maybe try a different area. No one argued. We broke camp with unusual efficiency, each task performed with minimal conversation and frequent glances toward the surrounding forest. Morning light filtered through the canopy, transforming the oppressive darkness into a dappled green cathedral that should have been beautiful, but felt deceptive, a veneer of normalcy concealing something fundamentally wrong. As we shouldered our packs for the trek back to the SUV, I noticed something odd about the tree line where Jasper claimed to have seen the figure. The undergrowth appeared disturbed, branches bent and broken in a pattern inconsistent with animal passage. Moving closer, I discovered distinct impressions in the soft forest floor, indentations too large and deep to belong to any recognized wildlife. Guys, I called softly. You should see this. The others joined me, examining the markings with various expressions. Andre's calculating, Nolan's concerned, Jasper's vindicated. Told you, he murmured. Not a tree. Nolan crouched, measuring one of the impressions against his hand. Whatever made this was big and heavy. Bear? Andre suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. Bears leave claw marks, Nolan replied. These are just pressure points, like something stood here for a long time watching. A shiver ran through our group, a collective acknowledgement that Jasper's experience couldn't be easily dismissed. Without further discussion, we hastened our departure, moving through the forest with renewed urgency. The journey back seemed longer than our arrival, each sound amplified by heightened awareness. When we finally reached the SUV, the relief was palpable, a shared exhalation of tension that no one admitted but everyone felt. Where to now? Andre asked as we loaded our gear. Nolan studied his map. There's another potential site about 3 miles away, accessible from the right fork at that Y junction we passed yesterday. No one suggested leaving altogether, though I suspect we all considered it. The desire to understand what Jasper had seen, what I had heard during my watch, outweighed conventional caution. We were investigators, after all. Encountering something unexplainable was the point, not a reason to retreat. We backtracked to the Y junction, taking the right fork this time. The road immediately deteriorated, becoming little more than a rough trail with deep ruts and exposed rocks. After less than half a mile, Nolan stopped the SUV. This doesn't look passable, he announced, eyeing a particularly deep depression ahead. I'd better check before we risk it. He exited the vehicle, walking forward to examine the obstacle. Andre leaned forward from the back seat, watching through the windshield as Nolan assessed the situation. I adjusted the rear-view mirror, more from habit than necessity. That's when I saw it. A tall, unnaturally thin figure standing among the trees behind us, partially obscured by shadow but unmistakably present. The proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, torso too narrow, head oddly shaped. It stood perfectly still, a vertical anomaly among the vertical trees, almost camouflaged but revealed by subtle differences in texture and solidity. I froze, unable to speak or move, trapped in a moment of primal recognition, the prey sensing the predator. Beside me, Jasper remained oblivious, focused on something in his backpack. In the backseat, Andre continued watching Nolan through the windshield. Nolan returned to the driver's window, shaking his head. No way through without risking damage. We'll have to... He stopped mid-sentence, eyes fixing on something reflected in the glass. His face drained of color, mouth parting slightly in shock or recognition. Look, he whispered urgently. Behind us. We all turned simultaneously, a choreographed movement that would have been comical in any other context. There was no mistaking what we saw. The figure stood barely 30 yards away, its height emphasized by comparison to surrounding trees. 8 feet at minimum, possibly 9, with proportions that seemed human-adjacent rather than human. "Holy shit," Andre breathed, fumbling for his camera. "Don't move," Nolan commanded quietly. Nobody make sudden movements. We sat frozen, watching as the figure watched us. Despite the daylight, details remained frustratingly obscured, shadow and distance combining to create ambiguity. What was clear, however, was its stillness, an unnatural immobility that no human could maintain, as though it existed partially outside normal physical constraints. Jasper suddenly lunged across me, reaching for the glove compartment. The movement seemed to trigger something. The figure shifted position, not approaching but changing stance in a way that suggested heightened attention. "My rifle," I said quietly. "In the back. Pass it to me slowly." Andre complied with agonizing deliberation, sliding the weapon forward between the front seats. I accepted it, equally careful, and began loading with methodical precision. Each metallic click seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. As I prepared the weapon, the figure moved again, stepping partially behind a large pine, reducing its visible profile while maintaining line of sight. The movement was fluid yet somehow wrong, joints bending at angles that seemed biomechanically impossible. "What is it doing?" Jasper whispered. "Maintaining position while reducing exposure," Nolan replied, his military background evident in the assessment. "Tactical movement." The implication hung in the air. Whatever this entity was, it demonstrated strategic thinking, not just animal instinct. I finished loading the rifle but hesitated to aim directly at the figure. Something told me that crossing that line, moving from observation to threat, would precipitate a response we weren't prepared for. "We need to leave," Andre said quietly. Now, no one disagreed. Nolan started the engine, its rumble shattering the silence. I kept my eyes and the rifle trained on the figure as Nolan carefully executed a 3-point turn, reversing and then pulling forward to face back the way we'd come. As we began moving, I maintained visual contact through the rear window. The figure remained stationary, watching our retreat without pursuit. Only when we'd traveled about 50 yards did something unexpected happen. It raised one elongated arm in what appeared almost like a farewell gesture. "Did you see that?" I demanded. It waved at us. "Just drive," Jasper urged Nolan. "Faster." We accelerated down the rough road, bouncing painfully as the SUV navigated ruts and rocks. I continued watching behind us, rifle ready, half expecting to see the figure in pursuit. Instead, the forest closed around our retreat, empty of visible threats. We had traveled perhaps a quarter-mile when the scream came, high-pitched and sustained, neither fully human nor recognizably animal. It pierced through the vehicle's interior, setting my teeth on edge and raising every hair on my body. The sound modulated in impossible ways, shifting pitch and timbre beyond normal vocal capacity. "What the fuck was that?" Andre gasped when the sound finally faded. No one answered. No one had an answer to give. We drove in tense silence, constantly checking mirrors and windows for signs of pursuit. None materialized, yet the sensation of being monitored never diminished. Something was tracking us, perhaps not physically following, but aware of our movements, our direction, our eventual destination. By unspoken consensus, we bypassed Flagstaff entirely, stopping only when we reached the relative safety of a roadside motel in Williams, 30 miles west. There, in a cramped room with 2 double beds and faded wallpaper, we finally attempted to process what we'd experienced. The motel room in Williams became our sanctuary and debriefing center. After securing the door with both lock and chair, we spread our equipment across the beds. Cameras, audio recorders, notebooks filled with hastily scribbled observations. None of us had showered or eaten. Those biological necessities seemed insignificant compared to understanding what we'd encountered. "Let's review what we know objectively," Nolan suggested, his military training asserting itself in crisis. "Facts only, no interpretation yet." We nodded agreement, grateful for his structured approach. Fact 1. We encountered a bipedal entity approximately 8 to 9 feet in height, he continued, writing in his notebook. Fact 2. It demonstrated intelligence through tactical movement and possibly communication via gesture. Fact 3. It produced vocalizations outside normal parameters for known wildlife, Andre added. Fact 4. It left identifiable impressions in soft ground, confirming physical presence rather than hallucination, I contributed. Jasper paced between beds, unusually quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Fact 5. It was watching me last night before revealing itself to everyone today. It chose when to be seen. The implication hung heavily in the room. Whatever we'd encountered had agency, purpose, intent. Not a random animal crossing our path, but something actively engaged with our presence. We need to check our documentation, Andre decided, reaching for his camera. See if we captured anything useful. This proved disappointing. Despite multiple cameras running during our encounter, the entity remained frustratingly obscured in every frame, partially hidden by trees, blurred by distance or light conditions. Audio recordings captured ambient forest sounds and our own reactions, but the creature's scream occurred after we'd stopped recording. It's like it knew, Jasper muttered. Knew exactly how to position itself to avoid clear documentation. That's anthropomorphizing, Andre countered, though without his usual conviction. Assigning human-like intent to natural phenomena. Natural? Jasper laughed humorlessly. What part of that seemed natural to you? Tension escalated until Nolan intervened. Let's focus on what we do have. Physical descriptions, multiple witnesses, consistent observations across different times and locations. We spent hours compiling notes, cross-referencing observations, trying to construct a coherent narrative from our fragmented experiences. Outside, daylight faded into evening. None of us suggested leaving the room even for food. Eventually, we ordered pizza delivery, eating mechanically while continuing our analysis. Around midnight, exhaustion finally outweighed adrenaline. We established a watch rotation similar to our camping arrangement, though the motel room's thin walls and proximity to civilization made it seem almost comically paranoid. Nevertheless, no one objected. I took the first watch, seated near the window where I could observe both the parking lot and the darkened hills beyond. The others arranged themselves across the 2 beds, fully clothed, ready to move if necessary. Their breathing soon settled into the rhythms of sleep, leaving me alone with my thoughts. What had we encountered? My mind cycled through possibilities, each less satisfying than the last. No known animal matched our observations. No human could achieve that height or move with that unnatural fluidity. I found myself returning to my grandfather's stories, tales of entities that existed in the spaces between categorization, neither fully physical nor entirely spiritual. He'd spoken of beings that watched from forest edges, entities attracted to human intention and awareness. When you look for them, they look back, he'd explained. Attention is invitation. Had our investigation itself drawn this thing to us? The thought was unsettling, that our curiosity, our desire to document the unexplained might have functioned as a beacon or summoning. My watch passed without incident. I woke Andre for the second shift, then collapsed onto the vacant space beside Jasper, sleep claiming me instantly. Morning brought subdued activity, showers taken in rotation, coffee obtained from the motel lobby, equipment repacked with mechanical efficiency. We spoke little, each processing privately what collective discussion had failed to resolve. Over breakfast at a nearby diner, Nolan finally addressed the question we'd all avoided. Do we continue the investigation or head back to Phoenix? Silence followed. I studied my companions' faces. Andre's thoughtful, Jasper's troubled, Nolan's carefully neutral. I vote we go back, Jasper said eventually. Whatever that thing was, it was aware of us before we were aware of it. That's not a dynamic I'm comfortable with. Andre nodded reluctant agreement. We're not equipped for this level of encounter. We need more preparation, better equipment, possibly additional personnel. Nolan turned to me. Your thoughts? I hesitated, torn between rational caution and persistent curiosity. Part of me wants to understand what we experienced, I admitted. But Jasper's right. It had the advantage from the beginning. Tactically, strategically, we're outmatched. Decision made. We paid our bill and returned to the SUV. The drive back to Phoenix passed in contemplative silence, each of us occasionally checking mirrors and scanning roadside trees, a habit that would persist for weeks afterward. Back in the familiar heat of Phoenix, we parted with promises to reconnect soon, to analyze our limited documentation, to research similar encounters. Those promises remained mostly unfulfilled. Whether by unspoken agreement or individual instinct, we avoided substantial discussion of our experience for months afterward. Jasper withdrew from our investigation group, focusing instead on work and conventional hobbies. Andre buried himself in technical analyses of our equipment, seeking rational explanations for its failure to capture clear evidence. Nolan said little but carried his pistol more consistently, even in everyday situations. As for me, I found myself drawn to my grandfather's stories with renewed interest, searching for parallels to our encounter. I dreamed frequently of forest shadows and watching eyes, waking with the persistent sensation of being observed even in my locked apartment. The experience changed us individually and collectively, not dramatically in ways outsiders would notice, but fundamentally in how we perceived the world and its possibilities. The comfortable certainty of explicable reality had been permanently disrupted, replaced by awareness of unseen presences and unanswered questions. I never expected to return to those northern forests. Yet 5 months later, circumstances would bring me back to Flagstaff, to another encounter that would confirm our experience wasn't isolated or imaginary. The Watcher in the Woods remained active, and for reasons I still don't fully understand, it maintained its interest in me. January 2019 arrived with unusual weather patterns across Arizona. While Phoenix experienced mild temperatures and clear skies, Flagstaff received record snowfall, over 3 feet in a single week, transforming the mountain city into a winter wonderland that drew visitors from throughout the state. I hadn't planned to return so soon. The memory of our September encounter remained raw, surfacing in dreams and unexpected moments of déjà vu. But when my friend Miguel suggested a weekend trip to enjoy the snow, I found myself agreeing despite lingering apprehension. Perhaps facing the location would help process the experience. Besides, winter daylight, open areas, and busy ski slopes presented a very different environment from our isolated forest campsite. Miguel invited Kay to join us, and I suggested visiting my college friends Bryce and Gavin, who attended Northern Arizona University. They enthusiastically offered their apartment as accommodation, eliminating any need to stay in motels or venture into remote areas. The plan seemed safe, controlled, far removed from our previous ill-fated expedition. We arrived in Flagstaff on a Friday afternoon, the city transformed by pristine white drifts and ice-laden pines. Streets had been plowed but remained slippery. Pedestrians navigated with the careful deliberation of those unaccustomed to winter conditions. Miguel drove cautiously, his Southern California background providing little experience with snow. Bryce and Gavin's apartment near campus welcomed us with warmth and normalcy: pizza, beer, video games, conversation about classes and future plans. I participated mechanically, one part of my attention always elsewhere, scanning windows and doorways for shapes that didn't belong. "You seem distracted," Bryce observed when the others had moved to the kitchen for more food. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just tired from the drive. I'll be fine after a good night's sleep." Saturday dawned bright and cold, the temperature hovering around 20 degrees despite brilliant sunshine. Our group planned a day of sledding and snowboarding at a popular recreation area near the university's sports complex. The location's proximity to campus and city infrastructure reassured me. This was public space, populated and safe, nothing like the isolated forest that haunted my memories. We arrived mid-morning to find dozens of people already enjoying the slopes, families with children, college students, tourists capturing photos of their winter adventure. The normality was comforting, a reminder that most people experience Flagstaff as simply a picturesque mountain town, not a place of inexplicable encounters. For several hours, I managed to immerse myself in the experience, the exhilaration of sledding downhill, the burn of cold air in my lungs, the good-natured competition as we raced and built increasingly elaborate snow ramps. The weight of September's encounter receded, replaced by simple physical enjoyment. Around 2 o'clock, exhaustion and cold began taking their toll. Bryce suggested warming up in the car before another round of sledding. He and I trudged up the hill toward the parking area, leaving the others to continue their snowboarding attempts. This was a good idea, I admitted as we reached the car. I needed some normal fun. Bryce unlocked the doors with a curious glance. As opposed to abnormal fun, what exactly do you get up to in Phoenix? I laughed, deflecting the question with a vague comment about work stress. We settled into the front seats, heater running, watching distant figures navigate the sledding hill. Conversation drifted between casual topics, movies, music, mutual friends from undergraduate days. Then Bryce's expression changed, focus shifting to something beyond my shoulder. "That's weird," he murmured. "What is?" I turned, following his gaze toward a distant ridge that marked the boundary between developed recreation area and wilder forest beyond. "Thought I saw someone watching us from up there," Bryce replied, squinting. Really tall figure, just standing at the tree line. My heart rate accelerated instantly, mouth going dry. "Where exactly?" Bryce pointed toward a section of dense pines about 300 yards distant. "Right at the edge there. But it's gone now, probably just shadows playing tricks." I stared at the indicated area, searching for movement or anomalous shapes. Nothing visible disrupted the uniform green and white pattern of snow-laden trees, yet certainty grew within me. Whatever we'd encountered in September had found me again. "You okay?" Bryce asked, noticing my rigid posture and focused attention. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just thought I recognized someone," I lied, forcing my body to relax. "My mistake." We rejoined the others shortly afterward, but my enjoyment had evaporated. Every few minutes my attention returned to that distant ridge, expecting to glimpse a tall figure observing our activities. The sensation of being watched returned with crushing intensity, despite the crowded, open environment. I manufactured an excuse about developing a headache, suggesting we return to the apartment earlier than planned. If the others noticed my abrupt change in demeanor, they attributed it to fatigue or cold exposure. That evening, while my friends played video games in the living room, I retreated to the guest bedroom with my laptop, searching obsessively for information about tall entities in northern Arizona forests. Most results led to tourist trap websites about Bigfoot sightings or paranormal investigation groups similar to our own. Their evidence equally inconclusive, their theories equally unsatisfying. One forum thread caught my attention. A hiker describing an encounter near Flagstaff remarkably similar to ours, including the entity's unusual proportions and the distinctive scream. The account ended with a detail that made my skin prickle. It follows interest. If you look for it, acknowledge it. It becomes aware of you, and that awareness doesn't end when you leave its territory. I closed the laptop, suddenly unwilling to pursue further information. Outside the window, snow had begun falling again, thick flakes descending through the glow of streetlights. Between gaps in neighboring buildings, I could see the dark mass of mountains rising beyond the city. Territories largely unexplored and unknown despite their proximity to civilization. Was it out there now, moving through snow-covered forests with that unnatural grace we'd witnessed? Was its attention still fixed on me, on us, on our brief intrusion into its domain? The question circled without resolution, persistence matching the steady accumulation of snow outside. Sleep came reluctantly that night, disrupted by dreams of being pursued through endless white forests by a figure always just behind me, always gaining ground no matter how fast I ran. I woke repeatedly, each time requiring several moments to reorient myself to the safety of Bryce and Gavin's apartment. Sunday morning, I insisted on early departure despite planned activities. My friends accepted the excuse of work obligations with mild disappointment, but no suspicion. By noon, we were heading south on Interstate 17, descending from mountains to desert, leaving Flagstaff and its watcher behind. Or so I thought. The drive back to Phoenix offered physical distance, but no psychological relief. As saguaro cacti replaced pine trees and temperature gauges climbed back into the 70s, I found myself repeatedly checking the rear-view mirror, half expecting to glimpse something impossible keeping pace with our vehicle. Miguel noticed my tension, but attributed it to driving conditions rather than persistent dread. "Glad to be back in civilization?" he asked as Phoenix's sprawl appeared on the horizon. Something like that, I replied noncommittally. Over subsequent weeks, I attempted to resume normal life. Work meetings, social obligations, everyday routines that should have grounded me in conventional reality. Instead, ordinary activities became opportunities for hypervigilance. Each unexplained sound or peripheral movement triggering instant fight or flight responses. I avoided discussing the Flagstaff incidents with anyone, including my former investigation companions. Jasper had essentially disappeared from our social circle, focusing entirely on work and a new relationship. Andre occasionally reached out with technical updates about equipment or methodology, carefully avoiding direct reference to what we'd witnessed. Nolan maintained distant contact through group messages, never mentioning our shared experience. Our collective silence spoke volumes, not denial, exactly, but recognition that language itself proved inadequate for processing what we'd encountered. Conventional frameworks, scientific, paranormal, religious, psychological, offered partial explanations at best, linguistic approximations of something that existed beyond categorical boundaries. 2 months after the winter Flagstaff trip, I met with my maternal grandmother, my indigenous grandfather's widow. I hadn't planned to discuss my experiences, but something in her perceptive gaze suggested understanding beyond words. "You've seen something, haven't you?" she asked as we sat in her small garden, desert birds flitting between cacti and mesquite. "What do you mean?" I deflected, though my accelerated heartbeat betrayed recognition. She smiled gently. "Your grandfather used to get that same look, like you're listening to something no one else can hear. He called it double vision, seeing both this world and what exists alongside it." The validation in her words unlocked something I'd suppressed. Without mentioning specific locations or companions, I described what I'd experienced: the tall entity, its unnatural movements, the feeling of being recognized and remembered by something outside human understanding. She listened without interruption, without skepticism or attempts to reframe my account in more palatable terms. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "Your grandfather would say you've caught the attention of a boundary walker," she explained. "A being that exists where categories overlap, not fully physical, not fully spirit, but participating in both natures." "Is it dangerous?" I asked the question that had haunted me for months. "Not in ways you might expect," she replied carefully. "It doesn't want to harm your body. It's curious about your awareness, your ability to perceive it when most cannot." "Why me? Why us?" "You were looking for it," she said simply. "Most people move through life with blinders on, seeing only what fits their understanding of reality. When you deliberately removed those limitations, opened yourself to other possibilities, you became visible to things that exist in those possibilities. How do I make it stop?" The question emerged more desperately than intended. My grandmother's expression softened with sympathy. "You can't unsee what you've seen or unknown what you now know, but you can choose how to live with that knowledge." Her advice was both profound and frustratingly abstract. In practical terms, she suggested acknowledging the entity's existence without actively seeking further contact, a middle path between denial and obsession. She gave me a small stone pendant, not explaining its significance beyond saying it had belonged to my grandfather. "Keep it with you," she instructed. "It won't prevent awareness, but it may help you maintain boundaries." I wore the pendant consistently afterward, a tangible connection to indigenous knowledge that predated modern categorizations of reality. Whether its effect was psychological or something more remains unclear, but nightmares decreased in frequency, and the constant sensation of being observed gradually diminished. 6 months after our initial encounter, I finally reconnected with Jasper, meeting at a neutral location, a busy downtown coffee shop where normality surrounded us like protective armor. We exchanged casual updates about work and life before carefully approaching the subject that had simultaneously connected and separated us. "Do you still think about it?" I asked finally, both of us understanding the reference without elaboration. Jasper nodded, expression solemn. "Every day. Not constantly anymore, but it changed something fundamental in how I perceive everything." "Have you experienced anything since?" The question I'd been afraid to ask directly. He hesitated, glancing around to ensure private conversation. Twice. Once at my apartment, I woke up feeling watched and saw something tall outside my bedroom window. Second floor, no access. Nothing there when I checked, but... You knew, I finished for him. The same presence. Exactly. Relief colored his voice, being believed without explanation or justification. Andre thinks we experienced some kind of group hallucination triggered by environmental factors. Nolan suspects unacknowledged military testing of psychological warfare techniques. And you? Jasper met my gaze directly. I think we encountered something that's always been there, but most people filter out of awareness. Something that becomes perceptible only when you actively look for it. And once you do, you can't stop seeing it. His assessment aligned with my grandmother's explanation. Different terminology describing similar understanding. We talked for hours, sharing details previously unmentioned, finding patterns in our separate experiences since the initial encounter. The conversation provided no definitive answers but offered something perhaps more valuable. Confirmation that neither of us faced this altered reality alone. As months became a year, the acute fear transformed into chronic awareness, a background hum of perception that occasionally intensified but never completely disappeared. I learned to function with this awareness, to integrate it rather than fight against it. The entity never again manifested as clearly as during our forest encounter, but its presence remained discernible in certain locations, under certain conditions. A tall shadow glimpsed between buildings at dusk, an unusual silhouette among trees during hiking trips, the distinct feeling of attention focusing briefly before moving elsewhere. I never returned to Flagstaff or its surrounding forests. Some boundaries once recognized deserve respect, not from fear alone, but acknowledgement that human understanding remains limited, human presence sometimes unwelcome in territories we share but do not control. The investigation group officially disbanded, though individual friendships continued. We found other interests, other projects, other ways to explore life's mysteries without directly inviting attention from things that exist beyond conventional categories. I still wear my grandfather's pendant. I still occasionally wake from dreams of being watched from forest edges. I still find myself scanning tree lines and shadowed corners for unnaturally tall figures. But I've learned to live with uncertainty, with knowing that complete explanation remains impossible, that some experiences resist classification, that reality encompasses more than what most people perceive or acknowledge. If you find yourself in northern Arizona forests, particularly those quiet areas where human presence thins and ancient trees create cathedral silence, remain aware of your surroundings. Not every shadow contains a watcher. Not every unexpected sound indicates presence beyond normal wildlife. But perception creates connection. Attention invited becomes attention returned. And once you've been noticed, truly noticed by something that exists in the margins between known categories, that recognition never completely fades. You carry it forward, an awareness that permanently alters how you move through the world. Not necessarily a curse, not exactly a gift, but an irrevocable shift in understanding. The forests remember. The Watcher remembers, and so do I. I've debated sharing this account for years. Even now my hands tremble as I type. For privacy reasons, I won't disclose my name or the exact county, but this occurred in a remote area of Colorado, deep in the mountains where cell service disappears and civilization feels like a distant memory. I was 11 years old when it happened, though I'm 16 now. Time hasn't dulled the memories. If anything, they've only sharpened with age. What I experienced has shaped my perception of reality and safety in ways I'm still trying to understand. Our family planned a weekend getaway at my Aunt Vera's cabin during late February. The winter had been particularly harsh that year, with record snowfall and temperatures that regularly dropped well below freezing. School had just let out for a brief midwinter break, and my parents thought the mountains would offer a peaceful retreat. The drive took nearly 4 hours from our suburban home. I remember watching the landscape transform. First the sprawling suburbs, then farmland, and finally the imposing mountains with their snow-capped peaks and dense forests. My father kept checking the weather forecast on the radio, concerned about potential storms. My mother sat silently in the passenger seat, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. "We should arrive before sunset," my father said, glancing at the dashboard clock. "I don't want to navigate those mountain roads in the dark." The paved highway eventually gave way to gravel, and finally to a narrow dirt road that wound precariously along the mountainside. Pine trees crowded against both sides, their branches heavy with snow, creating a natural tunnel that seemed to swallow our vehicle. The further we drove, the more intense my feeling of isolation became. I had visited Aunt Vera's cabin twice before, but always during summer when the forest buzzed with life and warmth. Winter transformed it into something altogether different, stark, silent, and somehow watchful. Even before we arrived, I sensed something wasn't right. The forest was too quiet, lacking the occasional calls of winter birds or the scurrying of small animals across the snow. My father parked our SUV beside the cabin just as the sun began its descent behind the mountain ridge. Long shadows stretched across the snow-covered clearing, and the temperature dropped noticeably. The cabin stood dark and silent, waiting for us. "Remember what I told you," my father said as we unloaded our luggage. "Stay close to the cabin. These mountains can be dangerous, especially in winter." I nodded, but my attention had already shifted to the surrounding forest and the narrow path that disappeared between the trees, the trail that led to what my aunt called the Forgotten Railway, an abandoned tunnel project that had been halted decades ago due to funding issues and engineering challenges. Something about that path called to me even then. The cabin was smaller than I remembered, one main room combining kitchen and living areas, a bathroom and a single bedroom with bunk beds for the children and a queen-sized bed for adults. The walls were lined with rough-hewn pine, and a stone fireplace dominated the living area. The entire structure smelled of wood smoke and pine, with an underlying mustiness that spoke of long periods of vacancy. My father immediately set to work starting a fire, while my mother unpacked our food supplies. I stood by the single window in the bedroom, staring out at the darkening forest. The window faced east toward the railway tunnel, though it wasn't visible from the cabin. Below the window was a deep drainage ditch that circled the cabin's foundation, about 4 feet deep, designed to channel snowmelt away from the structure during spring thaws. "Don't leave that window open," my mother called from the kitchen. "We need to conserve heat." I hadn't opened it, but something about her tone seemed off, more worried than practical. I noticed my parents exchanging glances throughout the evening, communicating silently in that way adults do when they don't want children to know something. Dinner was served early, canned stew heated on the propane stove, with bread that had been crushed during the journey. We ate in near silence, interrupted only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional howl of wind through the trees. My parents spoke little, and when they did, their conversation seemed forced and superficial. "The forecast says clear skies for tomorrow," my father mentioned, stirring his stew absently. "I thought we might hike to the old railway tunnel. It's supposed to be quite the engineering marvel, even if it was never completed." My mother's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Is that safe? I heard the entrance has been unstable for years." "We won't go inside," my father assured her. "Just look from a distance. The eastern entrance is apparently still accessible." I felt a surge of excitement at the prospect. The railway tunnel had featured prominently in the stories Aunt Vera told during summer visits. Tales of workers who disappeared during construction, strange sounds that echoed from within its depths, and the sudden abandonment of the project without clear explanation. "Can we go early?" I asked, perhaps too eagerly. My parents exchanged another look. "We'll see how the weather holds," my father replied non-committally. That night, I climbed into the top bunk while my parents prepared for bed. Through the bedroom window, I could see stars scattered across the black sky, unobstructed by city lights. The forest beyond was a wall of darkness. As I drifted toward sleep, I could have sworn I heard soft footsteps in the snow outside, too deliberate to be an animal, too light to be an adult human. But exhaustion from the journey pulled me under before I could investigate. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine reflecting off the snow, creating a glare so intense it hurt to look outside without squinting. Breakfast was quick: oatmeal and coffee for my parents, hot chocolate for me. By 9, we were dressed in our heaviest winter gear and ready to hike. The trail to the railway tunnel wasn't maintained, especially in winter. We trudged through knee-deep snow, following what my father believed was the path based on a crude map Aunt Vera had drawn years ago. The forest remained unnaturally silent. No birds called, no squirrels chattered, no wind rustled through the pine needles. Just the crunch of our boots on snow and our labored breathing in the thin mountain air. Shouldn't we hear something? I asked after nearly 20 minutes of hiking. Birds or something? My father stopped, apparently noticing the silence for the first time. Maybe they're just quieter in winter, he suggested, but his tone lacked conviction. As we continued, I began to notice other oddities. Despite the abundant wildlife that supposedly inhabited these mountains, we encountered no tracks in the snow other than our own. No deer, no rabbits, not even the tiny imprints of field mice. It was as if we were the only living creatures for miles. The trail curved around the base of a steep ridge, and suddenly the eastern entrance of the railway tunnel came into view. It was a dark gash in the mountainside, its concrete facing crumbling in places. Rusted rails emerged from the darkness before disappearing beneath decades of accumulated debris. A pile of rocks stood beside the entrance, taller than the others surrounding it, with what looked like broken timber protruding from its peak. "That's far enough," my father announced when we were about 50 yards from the entrance. I felt a surge of disappointment. "Can't we go closer? I want to see inside." "No." His response was uncharacteristically sharp. "The structure is unstable. Rocks could fall." But as he spoke, he wasn't looking at the tunnel ceiling or walls. His eyes were fixed on that peculiar pile of rocks beside the entrance, the one that caught the sunlight differently than the others, as if something within it reflected the light. As we stood there, I became aware of an odor, metallic and sharp like pennies held too long in a sweaty palm. At first I thought it might be coming from the rusted rails, but the scent seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper in the forest. "Do you smell that?" I asked, taking a step toward the source. My mother's hand clamped down on my shoulder with surprising force. "We're heading back now," she said, her voice tight with what I now recognize as fear. As we turned to leave, I glanced back at the tunnel entrance. For a brief moment, I thought I saw movement in the darkness, a shifting of shadows that couldn't be explained by our movement or the sun's position. And that pile of rocks, the tallest one, seemed somehow different than when we'd first arrived, though I couldn't articulate how. The walk back to the cabin was tense and silent. My father repeatedly glanced over his shoulder, and my mother kept me firmly between them. Neither would answer my questions about the tunnel or why we couldn't explore further. Their evasiveness only intensified my curiosity. The remainder of the day passed in strained normalcy. My parents attempted to distract me with board games and hot chocolate, but their attention kept drifting toward the windows, particularly as afternoon surrendered to evening and shadows lengthened across the snow. Dinner was another silent affair, broken only when my father announced he needed to gather more firewood from the stack behind the cabin. My mother visibly tensed. "I'll come with you," she said, rising quickly. "Someone needs to stay with the child," he responded, already pulling on his coat. My mother's face paled slightly, but she nodded. "Be quick." Those 15 minutes felt interminable. My mother stood by the window watching the tree line, her body rigid. When my father returned with an armload of logs, she exhaled audibly, as if she'd been holding her breath the entire time. That night, they stayed awake long after they'd sent me to bed. From my top bunk, I could hear their hushed voices through the partially open bedroom door. "Shouldn't have come in winter," my mother whispered. "Vera never mentioned anything specific about winter," my father responded. "Just that sometimes hikers reported strange experiences near the tunnel." "Did you see those rocks? The pile with the timber sticking out? It looked different on the way back." "I'm sure of it. And that smell? We're leaving tomorrow, first light." Their conversation shifted to logistics after that, and eventually they came to bed. I pretended to be asleep as they settled in, though sleep was far from my mind. Their fear, though they tried to hide it, was palpable and contagious. I found myself straining to hear sounds from outside, the wind, animals, anything to break the unnatural silence. Around what must have been midnight, my parents finally succumbed to exhaustion, their breathing deepening into the rhythms of sleep. I remained awake, staring at the ceiling of the cabin, tracing patterns in the wood grain illuminated by moonlight filtering through the window. The temperature in the room seemed to drop gradually. At first I attributed it to the fire dying down in the main room, but soon my breath became visible in the moonlight. The cold had a quality to it that felt deliberate, invasive, as if it originated from a single point rather than seeping in from outside. That point, I realized with growing horror, was the window. The room continued to grow colder, and with the dropping temperature came a feeling of crushing dread. The sensation didn't build gradually. It descended all at once, like plunging into icy water. My entire body tensed beneath the blankets, instinct telling me to remain absolutely still, to pretend I was asleep, to avoid drawing attention. But attention from what? I felt it then, a presence outside the window, not simply someone watching, but a hunger so intense it seemed to radiate through the glass. Whatever stood there knew I was awake. It knew I could sense its presence, and it was waiting for me to look. Every rational part of my mind screamed not to move, not to acknowledge what lurked outside. But something deeper, a primal instinct for survival, told me that ignoring it would be far more dangerous, that if I didn't confront it now, on my terms, it would find another way to reach me. In one desperate motion, I threw off my blankets, leaped from the top bunk, and grabbed the battery-powered lantern we kept on the nightstand. My bare feet hit the cold wooden floor with a thud that should have woken my parents, but they remained eerily still, as if in a deeper sleep than normal. Trembling, I twisted the lantern switch and raised it toward the window. The light revealed a face, if it could be called that, pressed against the glass. The skin was a bloodless white that seemed to absorb the lantern's glow rather than reflect it. Where eyes should have been were deep, hollow sockets that somehow still conveyed an intense focus. Its mouth, a lipless gash stretching unnaturally wide, contained rows of jagged teeth stained dark with what could only be blood. One hand was raised, poised to break the glass, fingers impossibly long and tapered to points sharp enough to pierce skin. The nails were the deep red of congealed blood, contrasting starkly with the pallid skin. For 3 eternal seconds we regarded each other, the creature and I, separated only by a thin pane of glass. Then it opened its mouth wider than any human jaw could stretch and emitted a sound I still hear in my nightmares. Not quite a scream, not quite a howl, but something that contained elements of both while being fundamentally different. The sound penetrated the glass, vibrating through my bones and striking some primordial chord of terror. The lantern slipped from my grasp, hitting the floor with a crack that finally roused my parents. When I looked back at the window, the face was gone. My father leaped from bed, disoriented but alert. "What happened? What was that sound?" I couldn't speak, could only point at the window with a shaking hand. My mother gathered me into her arms, her skin ice cold. "What did you see?" she whispered. "A face," I managed to stammer. "A white face with no eyes and sharp teeth. It was going to break the window." My parents exchanged glances over my head, not of disbelief but of confirmation. They had feared this. My father approached the window cautiously, peering out into the darkness. "Nothing there now," he said, but his voice trembled slightly. "We're leaving," my mother announced. "Now. Tonight." "The road might not be safe in the dark," my father countered. "Staying is less safe," she replied with finality. They began packing immediately, moving with the efficiency of genuine fear. I remained frozen in place, unable to process what I had seen, what it might mean. One detail kept returning to my mind. Given the depth of the drainage ditch below the window, whatever had looked in at me had to be inhumanly tall, at least 8 feet, just to reach the bottom edge of the glass. We left the cabin in darkness, loading our hastily packed belongings into the SUV while constantly scanning the tree line. The forest remained silent, but the silence now felt expectant, as if something was holding its breath, waiting. My father struggled to start the vehicle, the engine turning over reluctantly in the cold. When it finally roared to life, the sound echoed unnaturally loud in the clearing. My mother pulled me into the back seat, buckling me in with trembling hands before climbing into the front passenger seat. As we began to reverse, the headlights swept across the tree line, and for a split second, they illuminated a tall, gaunt figure standing at the edge of the forest. It didn't move or attempt to approach, just stood watching as we pulled away. My father saw it too. I heard his sharp intake of breath, felt the sudden acceleration as he backed onto the access road with less care than usual. The drive down the mountain was harrowing. The narrow dirt road was partially iced over, and my father navigated the hairpin turns with white-knuckled concentration. No one spoke. The only sounds were the engine strain and the occasional crunch of ice beneath our tires. Dawn was breaking as we reached the highway, pale light spilling over the eastern ridges. Only then did my parents begin to relax slightly, their breathing becoming less shallow, their postures less rigid. "We need to talk about what happened," my mother finally said, her voice hoarse. My father nodded but said nothing, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Aunt Vera told us there were stories," she continued, half turning to include me in the conversation. "Local legends about something that lives near the railway tunnel, something that comes out in winter when food is scarce." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, feeling betrayed. "We thought they were just stories," my father responded, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Ghost tales people tell about remote places. Vera never claimed to have seen anything herself." "But you felt it too," I pressed. "At the tunnel. That's why we couldn't get closer." My parents exchanged another look. "Yes," my mother admitted. "There was something wrong about that place. The silence. The smell. That pile of rocks with something sticking out. What was it?" I asked. "The thing at the window?" "I don't know," my father answered honestly. "I don't want to know." As we drove away from the mountains, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something ancient and patient. Something that would be waiting if we ever returned. The weeks following our hasty departure were marked by nightmares and nervous glances over shoulders. My parents never spoke directly about what had happened, deflecting my questions with vague assurances that we were safe now, that whatever had been at the cabin couldn't follow us home. But I noticed changes in them. My father installed additional locks on all our doors and windows. My mother developed a habit of checking those locks repeatedly before bed. Neither of them liked me to be outside alone after dark, even in our suburban neighborhood with its streetlights and nearby houses. I began researching obsessively, first folklore and cryptids, then moving to historical accounts of disappearances in the Colorado mountains. The library became my second home as I combed through local history books and newspaper archives. What I discovered disturbed me further. The railway tunnel project had been abandoned in 1943 after a series of accidents and disappearances. Official records cited engineering difficulties and wartime resource shortages, but local newspapers told a different story. Workers reported strange sounds echoing from within the partially completed tunnel. Tools would go missing overnight. And then people began to vanish, first a solitary surveyor, then a pair of laborers, and finally an entire 5-man team sent to investigate a cave-in. The project was shut down shortly after, the entrances supposedly sealed with concrete and warning signs posted. But over the decades, hikers continued to report unsettling experiences near the eastern entrance. Unexplained sounds, strange odors, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Most disturbing were the patterns I noticed. All documented encounters occurred during winter months. All involved people who had approached the tunnel entrance. And in many accounts, witnesses described a metallic, copper-like smell that preceded their experiences. The smell of blood. That pile of rocks by the tunnel entrance, the one my father had stared at so intently, I became convinced it wasn't rocks at all, but rather a cache of some kind. A storage place. The timber I'd seen protruding might have been bone. The thought made me physically ill. As months passed, the intensity of my fear gradually dulled, replaced by a morbid curiosity. What exactly had we encountered? Why did it approach our cabin that night? Was it actually connected to the tunnel? Or was that simply where it chose to reside? I began corresponding with others who claimed similar experiences in the region, comparing notes and theories. Some believed it was simply a particularly aggressive mountain lion or bear that had developed a taste for human flesh. Others suggested a human predator using the isolation of the mountains to hunt unsuspecting hikers and campers. But neither explanation accounted for what I had seen at the window. The inhuman height, the eyeless face, those needle-pointed fingers. No animal or human matched that description. By my 16th birthday, fear had transformed into determination. I needed answers, closure, perhaps even vindication. My parents had never fully acknowledged what we experienced. preferring instead to file it away as a strange, unexplainable incident best forgotten. I couldn't forget. I wouldn't. When I mentioned returning to the cabin to 3 of my closest friends, Michael, William, and Samantha, their reactions ranged from excited curiosity to concerned skepticism. None fully believed my account, but all were intrigued enough to consider joining me. "Let me get this straight," Michael said during our planning session in my basement. "You want us to go back to a remote cabin where you think you saw some kind of monster 5 years ago?" "I know what I saw," I insisted. "And my parents saw something too, even if they won't admit it now." "Assuming it was real," William countered, "isn't going back basically suicide?" Samantha, always the practical one, asked the most important question. "How would we even get there? None of us can drive yet." I had been working on the logistics for months. My Aunt Vera still owns the cabin. She rarely uses it in winter, but she keeps a key hidden on the property. As for transportation, I've saved enough from my summer job to cover a rideshare to the nearest town. From there, it's a 5-mile hike. In winter? Samantha raised an eyebrow. Through mountain terrain? We'll be prepared, I assured them, gesturing to the camping equipment I'd been gradually acquiring. Proper clothing, emergency supplies, satellite phone. And what exactly do you hope to accomplish? Michael asked. Best case scenario, we find nothing and freeze our asses off in a cabin with no electricity. Worst case, your monster eats us. I couldn't explain my need to return, to confront whatever waited there, to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated what happened. The experience had shaped my life for 5 years. I needed resolution one way or another. I'm going back next month, with or without you, I stated firmly. The forecast shows a clear weather window from the 15th through the 18th. 3 days, that's all I'm asking. After further discussion and debate, they reluctantly agreed. None believed we would encounter anything supernatural, but all recognized my determination and preferred I not go alone. Now, as I finalize our preparations, I find myself questioning my own motives. Am I truly seeking answers? Or am I subconsciously seeking to recapture that moment of pure terror? That absolute certainty that reality is broader and darker than we normally perceive. The creature at the window showed me a glimpse of something beyond ordinary experience. Despite the fear, despite the nightmares, that glimpse awakened a hunger for truth that conventional explanations cannot satisfy. In 2 weeks, we returned to the mountains. To the cabin. To the tunnel. I've told my friends to be prepared for anything, but the truth is no preparation can be adequate. If what I saw still lurks in those mountains, if that pile of rocks beside the tunnel entrance still grows taller each year, then we are embarking on a journey from which not all of us may return. Yet still we go. Because some questions demand answers, even when the cost of knowing may be unimaginably high. The summer of 2023 had been suffocating in every sense of the word. Our home in Tacoma, Washington had transformed into a pressure cooker of family tensions and work stress. My husband, Michael, and I were desperate for an escape with our 5 children. Zoe, 12, the twins Jack and James, 9, Haley, 7, and our youngest, Ben, 4. What about that water park in Idaho? Michael suggested one evening as we scrolled through vacation options on my laptop. We could borrow your dad's trailer, make it a proper road trip. The idea sparked immediate interest. A change of scenery might reset our collective mood. The children needed space to run wild, and frankly, Michael and I needed a break from the monotony of our daily routines. You mean Splash Mountain Resort? I asked, typing the name into the search bar. That's the one. Dad mentioned it's gotten some nice upgrades recently. I browsed through photos of winding water slides, wave pools, and smiling families. It looked perfect, manufactured fun perhaps, but a welcome distraction nonetheless. We could save money by staying at that campground down the road instead of the resorts, I suggested, clicking through to another site. Evergreen Valley Campground. Looks quiet, surrounded by trees. Might be nice to have some separation between the water park chaos and our sleeping arrangements. Michael peered over my shoulder at the screen. Seems reasonable. Let's book it for next week. 5 nights should give us plenty of time to exhaust the kids completely. I nodded, already mentally preparing the packing list. Neither of us had spent much time in Idaho beyond driving through on our way to visit relatives in Montana. The prospect of exploring new territory added an extra layer of anticipation. Little did I know that this innocent family vacation would become a marker in my life. A before and after that I would never quite reconcile. The morning of our departure arrived with unexpected fog, unusual for July. I stood in our driveway, watching Michael secure the last of our luggage in Dad's forest green truck. The trailer hitched behind it was a vintage Airstream, polished to a mirror shine despite its 30 years of use. "You okay, Jen?" Michael asked, noticing my hesitation. "Fine," I assured him, though something felt off. "Just checking we haven't forgotten anything." We hadn't, of course. I had spent 3 days preparing meticulously, clothes organized by day and activity, medication sorted, entertainment options for the long drive cataloged and stored. Organization was my defense against anxiety, a trait that had intensified since having children. The drive from Tacoma to our destination in Idaho would take approximately 8 hours, not accounting for the inevitable bathroom breaks and lunch stop. I had scheduled our departure for 6 a.m., hoping to arrive at the campground before sunset. As we crossed the Washington-Idaho border, the landscape transformed gradually. The lush greenery of the Pacific Northwest gave way to drier, more expansive vistas. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, their slopes dotted with pine forests and periodic clearings. "Mom, how much longer?" Jack's voice broke through the podcast Michael and I had been half listening to. "About 3 more hours," I replied, turning to check on the children. They were remarkably well-behaved considering the circumstances. Zoe reading a novel, the twins playing some complicated card game they'd invented, Haley coloring, and Ben napping in his car seat. By late afternoon, we turned onto a rural highway that wound through increasingly remote terrain. Cell service became spotty, and the radio stations dissolved into static. Michael switched it off, and we drove in relative silence, punctuated only by the occasional comment from the children. "The GPS says to turn here," I instructed as we approached a weathered wooden sign for Evergreen Valley Campground. The entrance road was unpaved but well-maintained, bordered by tall pines that filtered the diminishing sunlight into dappled patterns across the windshield. The campground itself appeared deserted at first glance, a collection of cleared spaces for RVs and tents, scattered amenities buildings, and a small central office with a dimly lit porch. As Michael parked near the check-in cabin, I noticed a few other vehicles and trailers positioned around the perimeter. "Let me handle the registration," I said, stepping out of the truck. The air felt different here, denser somehow, carrying the scent of pine and something else I couldn't identify. The silence was profound, broken only by distant bird calls and the sound of the children unbuckling their seatbelts inside the vehicle. The office was staffed by a single attendant, a weathered man in his 60s with deeply tanned skin and a silver mustache. He introduced himself as Howard and processed our reservation with minimal conversation. "You folks here for the water park?" he finally asked as he handed me our site map and gate code. "Yes. Taking the kids for a few days of fun," I replied, attempting friendliness. "Most folks stay at the resort campground," he remarked, his tone neutral. "It's more convenient." "We prefer a bit more space," I explained. "And your rates are better." Howard nodded slowly. "Site 17 is one of our more private spots. Good tree coverage, not too far from the bathhouse." He paused, then added, "There's some history to this land, you know. Old mining operations, indigenous settlements. Some folks are sensitive to that sort of thing." I wasn't sure how to respond to this cryptic statement, so I simply thanked him and returned to our waiting family. As we drove toward our assigned site, Michael asked about the exchange. "Just the usual check-in," I said, omitting Howard's strange comment. "We're at Site 17, supposed to be nice and private." The site was indeed secluded, positioned at the end of a small loop and backed by a dense section of forest. A fire ring, picnic table, and hookup stations comprised the amenities. Michael expertly positioned the trailer while I supervised the children's exploration of our temporary home. "Don't go past those trees," I instructed, pointing to the forest edge. "Stay where I can see you." As twilight descended, we established our camp with practiced efficiency. The familiar routine calmed my inexplicable unease. By the time dinner was prepared and consumed, Stars had emerged in the clear Idaho sky, more visible here than at home. "Beautiful night," Michael commented as we sat outside the trailer, the children already tucked into their bunks inside. "It is," I agreed, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the darkness beyond our campsite. Morning arrived with golden sunshine filtering through the trailer's small windows. I had slept surprisingly well considering my usual difficulty adjusting to new environments. The children woke early, excited for our first day at Splash Mountain. After a quick breakfast of cereal and fruit, we piled into the truck for the short drive to the water park. It was located just 5 miles from our campground, visible from the highway with its towering water slides and expansive parking lot already filling with visitors. "Remember to stay together," I reminded everyone as Michael distributed entry wristbands. "Zoe, keep an eye on Ben whenever Dad or I need a break." The park was impressive, larger than I had anticipated with attractions designed for various age groups. The twins immediately gravitated toward the more adventurous slides, while Haley and Ben preferred the shallow wave pool. Michael and I alternated supervision duties, occasionally joining in the fun when appropriate. During lunch at one of the park's overpriced restaurants, I noticed a staff member watching our family with unusual interest. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away and continued his duties. "Did you see that guy?" I asked Michael quietly. "Which one?" "The attendant by the trash cans." "He was staring at us," Michael shrugged. "Probably making sure we're not leaving a mess. These places are strict about that." I accepted his explanation, but something about the man's intense focus lingered in my thoughts throughout the afternoon. By late afternoon, the children were showing signs of exhaustion. Even the usually indefatigable twins were moving slower between attractions. We decided to return to the campground around 5, allowing time for showers, dinner, and an early night. On our way out, I scanned the exit area for the staff member I'd noticed earlier but didn't see him. Instead, I noticed a small gift shop near the park entrance. "Mind if I check that out quickly?" I asked Michael. "Might find something for my journal." He nodded, corralling the tired children toward the parking lot while I ducked into the shop. It was standard tourist fare, overpriced souvenirs, branded clothing, and useless trinkets. As I browsed absently, the cashier, an older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, engaged me in conversation. "Enjoying your visit?" she asked. "Yes, the kids love it. We're staying through the weekend." "At the resort?" she asked, ringing up the small notebook I'd selected. "No, Evergreen Valley Campground." It seemed quieter. The woman's expression changed subtly. "Oh, that's nice. Been there long?" "Just arrived yesterday," I replied, suddenly curious about her reaction. "Is there something I should know about the place?" She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. "It's a beautiful location, just some people find it a bit unsettling at night. Probably just the isolation." "Unsettling how?" I pressed. "Oh, nothing specific," she backpedaled. "Some folks are just city people, aren't comfortable with real darkness and quiet. I'm sure your family will be fine." She handed me my purchase with a forced smile. "Enjoy the rest of your stay." I rejoined my family with an undefined worry taking root. Michael noticed my expression as we drove back to the campground. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I lied. "Just tired." Our first evening at the campground passed without incident. We grilled hamburgers, toasted marshmallows over the fire pit, and shared stories until the younger children began to nod off. The night air was cool but comfortable, carrying the soothing sounds of wind through pine needles and distant cricket songs. I had always been sensitive to environments. Growing up, my mother called it being spiritually aware, while my more pragmatic father dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Whatever the source, I had developed personal rituals for protection, small prayers before sleep, certain crystals kept nearby, moments of meditation seeking guardianship from whatever benevolent forces might exist. That first night, I performed these rituals discreetly as Michael prepared the children for bed. I placed a small amethyst crystal under our mattress and silently asked for protection over our family. It was habit more than fear. I hadn't felt any specific threat beyond the vague unease sparked by the gift shop cashier's comments. Once everyone was settled, Michael and I sat at the picnic table outside with cups of tea, enjoying the tranquility. This was a good idea, he said, reaching for my hand across the table. I think we all needed this change of scenery. It's nice, I agreed, looking around at the surrounding campsites. Most were dark now, their occupants either asleep or absent. Only one site across the loop showed signs of activity, a single figure sitting by a low fire. Not many people here for peak season, I observed. Michael followed my gaze. Better for us. Less noise, more privacy. We retired to bed around 10, exhausted from the day's activities. The trailer's interior was cramped with 7 people, but we had developed an efficient system. The 3 girls in the convertible dining area, the twins in bunks, Ben on a small fold-out above our bed, and Michael and I in the main bedroom area. I fell asleep quickly, which was unusual for me in unfamiliar surroundings. My dreams were mundane, replaying scenes from our day at the water park, planning activities for tomorrow. I slept through the night without disturbance, waking only when sunlight began streaming through the windows. The second day followed a similar pattern to the first. We returned to Splash Mountain, exploring areas we hadn't visited previously. The children's confidence grew as they became familiar with the layout, and even Ben attempted some of the smaller slides with my assistance. I didn't see the staff member who had drawn my attention the previous day, nor did I return to the gift shop. The ordinary pleasures of watching my children enjoy themselves temporarily displaced my vague concerns. We left the park earlier this time, stopping at a local grocery store to replenish our supplies. The small town nearest to the campground was called Pinecrest, a single main street lined with essential businesses and a few tourist-oriented shops. The locals were polite but reserved, offering directions when asked but initiating little conversation. Back at the campground, Michael prepared an elaborate campfire dinner while I organized our purchases. Howard, the campground manager, drove past our site on a small utility vehicle, raising his hand in a minimal greeting as he continued his rounds. "Friendly bunch around here," Michael commented ironically. "They're probably tired of tourists," I suggested. "Can't blame them, really." After dinner, the children wanted to explore the campground's small playground, visible from our site but far enough away that I accompanied them while Michael cleaned up. The equipment was dated but functional. Swings, a slide, and a simple climbing structure. As Haley and Ben played on the swings, I noticed Zoe staring into the woods beyond the playground's edge. "What are you looking at?" I asked, moving to stand beside her. "I thought I saw someone watching us," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. At 12, she was straddling the line between childish imagination and adult perception. "Probably another camper," I suggested, scanning the tree line. The dense undergrowth revealed nothing unusual. "Where exactly?" She pointed toward a cluster of pines about 30 yards away. "There, but they're gone now." I studied the area carefully but saw no movement. "Let me know if you see them again, okay?" She nodded and rejoined her siblings at the playground. I remained vigilant for the rest of our time there, occasionally feeling the same sensation of being observed, but never catching sight of anyone. When we returned to our campsite, I mentioned Zoe's observation to Michael as we sat outside the trailer, the children already settling down inside. "Could be other kids from the campground," he suggested reasonably. "Or maybe just a deer. I saw several near the bathhouse earlier." "Probably," I agreed, though neither explanation fully satisfied me. "I think I'm going to turn in early tonight. I'm feeling oddly drained." "Too much sun," Michael diagnosed, kissing my forehead. "I'll be in soon." Inside the trailer, I checked on each of the children. All peaceful, already drifting toward sleep after their active day. I performed my protection rituals with more attention than the previous night, placing crystals at each corner of the trailer and silently reciting prayers for safety. I was nearly asleep when Michael came to bed. The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me was his arm, draping protectively across my waist, and the distant sound of something moving in the woods beyond our campsite. I don't know what time it was when I first became aware something was wrong. The trailer was dark, illuminated only by the faint blue glow of the digital clock, 2:17 a.m. I lay perfectly still, initially unsure what had awakened me. My body felt strange, heavy yet disconnected, as though I were floating slightly above the mattress. I tried to turn my head to check on Michael beside me, but discovered I couldn't move. Not even my fingers would respond to my mental commands. Panic flared immediately. I had read about sleep paralysis but had never experienced it personally. The rational part of my mind attempted to remain calm, remembering that the condition was temporary and harmless despite its terrifying nature. Then I saw it. A shape at the foot of our bed, darker than the surrounding darkness. My eyes struggled to process its dimensions. It seemed short, perhaps 4 feet tall, but its proportions were wrong somehow. The head appeared too large, with what looked like protrusions extending upward. I tried to scream to wake Michael, but my vocal cords were as frozen as the rest of my body. Only my eyes could move, tracking the figure as it remained motionless, watching me. The sensation of being observed was overwhelming. Though I couldn't discern facial features in the darkness, I felt the entity's attention focused entirely on me, studying, assessing, waiting. In my mind, I was frantically reciting protective prayers, desperately trying to break free from the paralysis that held me captive. Seconds stretched into an eternity as the standoff continued. Then abruptly, I felt Michael's hand on my arm, shaking me. The paralysis vanished instantly, and I gasped for air as though I'd been underwater. "Jen, you were making noises in your sleep," he said, voice rough with interrupted rest. I blinked rapidly, looking toward the foot of the bed. Nothing was there. "Bad dream," I managed, though the experience had felt far more substantial than any nightmare. "Sorry I woke you. You okay?" he asked, already drifting back toward sleep. "Fine," I lied, heart still racing. "Go back to sleep." But I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of my family's breathing and the occasional creaks of the trailer settling. Eventually, exhaustion overtook vigilance, and I fell into a restless sleep just before dawn. Morning arrived with uncomfortable brightness. I moved through breakfast preparations mechanically, the memory of the night's terror still vivid. The children, oblivious to my disquiet, chattered excitedly about returning to the water park. "You look terrible," Michael observed quietly as he helped me pack the day's supplies. "Still not sleeping well?" "Just that one bad dream," I said, unwilling to elaborate. "I'll be fine after some coffee." The day at Splash Mountain provided welcome distraction. Physical activity and the children's enthusiasm temporarily pushed aside my concerns. Yet periodically throughout the day I would find myself scanning crowds seeking something I couldn't name. By late afternoon, fatigue had settled deep in my bones. Michael noticed my flagging energy and suggested returning to the campground earlier than planned. "The kids can swim in the campground's pool," he offered. "It'll be less crowded and you can rest a bit." I agreed gratefully. Back at Evergreen Valley, I retreated to the trailer while Michael supervised the children at the small pool near the central facilities building. Alone in the relative quiet, I considered my options. Part of me wanted to pack up immediately and return home, dismissing the previous night as an isolated incident of sleep paralysis triggered by stress and unfamiliar surroundings. The practical challenges of explaining such a decision to Michael and the children, not to mention my father, whose trailer we had borrowed, made this solution problematic. Instead, I decided to research sleep paralysis on my phone, seeking strategies to prevent recurrence. The limited cellular service made browsing frustratingly slow, but I gathered enough information to form a plan, sleeping on my side rather than my back, establishing a regular breathing pattern before sleep, and avoiding excessive fatigue. When Michael and the children returned from the pool, I had regained some composure. We prepared dinner together and I deliberately kept conversation light, focusing on the children's experiences at the water park and plans for the following day. As darkness fell, however, my anxiety returned. I found myself watching the forest edge visible from our campfire, searching for movement among the shadows. The children noticed nothing amiss, but Michael caught my repeated glances toward the trees. "Worried about bears?" he asked quietly while the children were distracted by marshmallow roasting. "Just jumpy," I admitted. "Probably the sleep disruption last night." He squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Early night for everyone, I think. We've got 2 more full days here. Need to pace ourselves." The bedtime routine proceeded normally, though I took special care with my protective measures, placing crystals strategically and silently reinforcing my mental barriers. I positioned myself on my side facing Michael, determined to avoid the conditions that might trigger another episode of sleep paralysis. Sleep came reluctantly, but eventually I drifted off to the rhythm of Michael's breathing beside me. Awareness returned abruptly. The digital clock read 3:04 a.m. Again, that terrible heaviness pressed upon me, pinning me to the mattress. Despite my precautions, sleep paralysis had reclaimed me. This time I knew what was happening. I forced myself to remain calm, remembering that the condition was temporary. Focus on breathing, I told myself. Try to move one finger at a time. Then I saw it again, the figure from the previous night. But now it stood closer, at the side of the bed rather than the foot. In the dim light filtering through the window blinds, I could make out more details than before. Its body was humanoid but wrong in subtle ways. Joints positioned incorrectly, proportions distorted. The head remained oversized, and what I had taken for horns now appeared to be some kind of headdress or ritual decoration. Though the face remained in shadow, I sensed its eyes fixed on mine. In my mind, I screamed protective incantations. I begged for intervention, for release from this paralysis. I tried to call out to Michael, sleeping peacefully beside me, unaware of my torment. Then the figure moved. One distorted hand reached toward me, stopping inches from my face. The movement was deliberate, testing as though assessing some invisible boundary between us. I felt pressure in my chest, making breathing difficult even though my lungs continued their automatic function. Just as the entity's fingers were about to make contact, Michael stirred beside me. The figure instantly withdrew, fading into the shadows of the trailer. Simultaneously, the paralysis released me and I gasped audibly, causing Michael to wake fully. "Jen? What's wrong?" he asked, immediately alert. "Nothing," I managed, though my voice trembled. "Just another bad dream." He propped himself up on one elbow, studying my face in the minimal light. "Same as last night?" "Similar," I admitted, unwilling to describe the horror fully. "I think it's just stress." "Maybe we should cut the trip short," he suggested, surprising me. "If you're not getting proper rest." "No," I interrupted. "The kids are having such a good time. It's only 2 more nights. I'll be fine." He seemed unconvinced but didn't argue further. "Try to get some sleep. I'm right here." I nestled against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence, but sleep remained elusive for the rest of the night. I watched dawn gradually illuminate the trailer's interior, cataloging each sound from the surrounding campground. Early risers moving about, birds beginning their morning songs, the distant sound of vehicles on the highway. When it was finally a reasonable hour to begin the day, I slipped from bed, careful not to wake Michael or the children. Outside, the campground was peaceful in the early morning light. I walked to the central bathhouse, grateful for the simple normalcy of the task. An older woman was brushing her teeth at one of the sinks as I entered. She nodded in greeting. "Early riser too?" she asked pleasantly. "More like couldn't sleep," I admitted. She studied me briefly. "First time at Evergreen Valley?" I nodded, running water for my own morning routine. "Some folks have trouble sleeping here," she said casually. "My husband and I have been coming for years. You get used to it eventually." "Used to what exactly?" I asked, unable to mask my sudden intensity. She looked surprised by my reaction. "The quiet, dear. After city living, real silence can be unsettling." I wasn't convinced this was her original meaning, but she quickly finished her routine and left, offering a parting "enjoy your stay" that sounded more like a hope than an expectation. Back at our campsite, the family was awake and preparing breakfast. I joined them, forcing enthusiasm I didn't feel. When Michael suggested another day at Splash Mountain, I agreed, desperate for the distraction of crowds and daylight. The water park offered temporary respite from my growing dread. I participated in activities with the children, took photos, and maintained conversation with other parents we encountered. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, my mind constantly returned to the nighttime visitations. During a quiet moment while watching the children in the wave pool, I researched the history of the Evergreen Valley area on my phone. Most information was typical tourist content, highlighting natural beauty, recreational opportunities, and local services. However, one obscure blog post mentioned the land's history before becoming a campground. According to the writer, the area had been sacred to indigenous peoples, specifically used for vision quests and communication with the spirit world. Later, during mining operations in the late 1800s, several unexplained deaths had occurred, causing temporary abandonment of the site. The information was presented without documentation or sources, making its reliability questionable. Nevertheless, it aligned uncomfortably with my experiences and Howard's cryptic comment about the land's history. By late afternoon, I found myself checking the time repeatedly, dreading our return to the campground. Michael noticed my distraction during dinner at the water park's restaurant. "We could stay at a hotel tonight," he suggested quietly, while the children were occupied with their meals. "Say the trailer's having problems with the water system or something." The offer was tempting, but practicality intervened. "All our things are at the campsite, and it would be expensive to find rooms for all of us last minute." "Money's not worth your peace of mind," he countered. I hesitated, weighing options. Moving to a hotel might solve the immediate problem but would raise questions from the children. And part of me, the stubborn, analytical part, wanted to understand what was happening rather than simply flee from it. "One more night," I decided. "If it happens again, we'll leave tomorrow regardless of the cost or inconvenience." Michael seemed relieved by this compromise. "Promise you'll wake me immediately if anything happens?" "I promise," I agreed, though I wasn't confident in my ability to break through the paralysis to alert him. We returned to the campground as sunset painted the sky in dramatic oranges and purples. The beauty contrasted sharply with my inner turmoil. While Michael supervised the children's bedtime preparations, I discreetly reinforced my protective measures, adding a circle of salt around our bed that I disguised as spilled seasoning when Michael questioned it. "Taking no chances tonight," I told him as we prepared for sleep. "I'm determined to get proper rest." He nodded supportively, though I could see concern in his eyes. We settled into bed earlier than usual, both of us exhausted from interrupted sleep and the day's activities. Despite my fear, natural fatigue eventually pulled me toward unconsciousness. My last coherent thought was a plea for protection. From what exactly? I still wasn't certain. The awareness of paralysis came instantly this time. No gradual recognition, but immediate understanding that it had happened again. The clock read 2:49 a.m. The familiar heaviness pressed me into the mattress, immobilizing everything except my eyes. I didn't need to search for the entity. It stood directly beside the bed, closer than ever before. In the faint moonlight filtering through the window, I could now see details that had previously been obscured by darkness. The figure was indeed humanoid, but withered, as though desiccated by time. What I had taken for a headdress appeared to be actual protrusions from the skull. Not horns exactly, but bone-like structures that extended upward and outward. The face remained difficult to discern, features twisted in ways that defied anatomical logic. Most disturbing was its stance, no longer observing from a distance but actively engaged, leaning toward me with clear intent. One hand extended again, reaching not for my face this time but for my chest, directly over my heart. In my mind, I screamed every protection prayer I knew. I called on guardians, ancestors, any force that might intervene. I tried to wake Michael through sheer mental effort, projecting my terror toward his sleeping form. The entity's hand hovered inches above my chest. Though no physical contact occurred, I felt pressure building there, a crushing sensation that restricted my breathing even further. Darkness began to encroach on my vision, consciousness threatening to slip away entirely. In desperation, I focused all my remaining mental energy on a single thought. My children needed me. I would not abandon them to whatever this entity intended. This fierce maternal protection crystallized into something tangible, a surge of will that pushed back against the paralysis. With monumental effort, I managed to move one finger, breaking the paralytic hold fractionally. The entity reacted immediately, withdrawing slightly as though surprised. I seized this momentary advantage, forcing more movement, my hand, then arm, finally my voice. The sound that emerged was barely recognizable as speech, but it was enough to wake Michael. As consciousness returned to him, the entity retreated rapidly, seeming to dissolve into the shadows rather than physically move away. "Jen!" Michael was fully alert now, gripping my shoulders. "What's happening? You were making terrible sounds." The paralysis had broken completely with the entity's departure. I gasped for air, trembling uncontrollably. We need to leave, I managed between breaths. Now, tonight. He didn't question my urgency, recognizing genuine terror when he saw it. I'll start packing. Should I wake the kids? I nodded, unable to articulate further. While Michael gently roused the children, I began gathering our belongings, movements mechanical but purposeful. The children, disoriented and confused, asked sleepy questions that Michael answered with gentle reassurances about a change of plans. Within 30 minutes, essential items were packed and the trailer was hitched to the truck. I insisted on checking every corner before allowing the children to move from the trailer to the vehicle, unwilling to leave anyone vulnerable even for seconds. As Michael pulled out of our campsite, I watched the tree line beyond, half expecting to see the entity emerge from the darkness. Nothing visible appeared, but the sensation of being observed remained until we passed through the campground's exit gate. We drove in silence for several miles, the children drifting back to sleep in their seats. Finally, Michael spoke, voice carefully neutral. "Want to tell me what happened?" I hesitated, uncertain how to describe the experience without sounding completely irrational. "It wasn't just sleep paralysis," I finally said. "There was something in the trailer with us, watching, waiting. Tonight it tried to—" I trailed off, unable to articulate exactly what the entity had intended. To his credit, Michael didn't dismiss my account or suggest psychological explanations. Instead, he asked, "Did it hurt you?" "Not physically," I answered. "But it would have if I hadn't broken free when I did." He nodded, accepting this without further question. "Where to, hotel?" "Just drive for now," I said. "Put as much distance between us and that place as possible. We can find somewhere to stop when it's properly light." We continued through the night, eventually stopping at a chain hotel in a small city, nearly 100 miles from Evergreen Valley. Michael handled check-in while I remained with the sleeping children, watching the eastern sky gradually lighten with approaching dawn. In the hotel room, with the children settled in proper beds and Michael showering, I finally allowed myself to process the experience. Whatever had visited me those 3 nights was beyond my understanding. Perhaps a manifestation of the land's troubled history, perhaps something else entirely. The distinction seemed less important than the simple fact of survival. "We'll tell the kids the trailer had problems," Michael said when he emerged from the bathroom. "No need to frighten them." I agreed, grateful for his pragmatic approach and unquestioning support. As sunlight began streaming through the hotel curtains, I finally felt safe enough to close my eyes. 2 years have passed since our hasty departure from Evergreen Valley Campground. We never returned to Splash Mountain Resort to use our remaining day's admission, nor did we offer any explanation to my father beyond a vague complaint about plumbing issues in the trailer. The children were initially disappointed but quickly adapted to the impromptu hotel stay and modified vacation plans. Within weeks, they had largely forgotten the midnight evacuation, retaining only memories of water slides and campfire marshmallows. For me, the experience left deeper marks. Sleep became problematic for months afterward, each approach to unconsciousness accompanied by fear of paralysis returning. I increased my protective practices, researched spiritual cleansing techniques, and briefly consulted a therapist who specialized in trauma and sleep disorders. The therapist offered rational explanations: stress-induced sleep paralysis combined with hypnagogic hallucinations, potentially triggered by unfamiliar surroundings and parental anxiety. This clinical assessment provided some comfort, though it failed to account for certain aspects of my experience. Michael never questioned the reality of what I'd encountered. Though we rarely discussed it directly, he supported my subsequent avoidance of camping and respected my need for extensive nighttime lighting in our home. His matter-of-fact acceptance proved more healing than any therapeutic intervention. Approximately 6 months after our Idaho trip, curiosity finally overcame caution, and I researched Evergreen Valley more thoroughly. What I discovered was unsettling. Several online forums contained accounts similar to mine, visitors reporting sleep disturbances, sensations of being watched, and in a few cases, visual manifestations matching my experience. Most dismissive commenters attributed these reports to urban legends amplifying ordinary experiences. Others suggested environmental factors, perhaps radon gas from the area's mining history causing hallucinations, or infrasound from wind patterns triggering anxiety responses. A smaller subset of discussions took the phenomena seriously, connecting them to the land's indigenous history. According to these sources, the area had indeed been used for spirit communication, specifically to connect with entities believed to exist between the living and dead worlds. These practices had allegedly been disrupted by mining operations, creating an imbalance that manifested in the experiences reported by sensitive individuals. I don't know which explanation comes closest to truth. Perhaps there is no single answer, but rather a convergence of factors, geological, psychological, and potentially something beyond current scientific understanding. What I know with certainty is that something in that location recognized and targeted me specifically. Whether drawn by my existing sensitivity or simply opportunistic, it attempted an interaction that felt predatory rather than curious or communicative. I have experienced no recurrence of sleep paralysis since that final night at Evergreen Valley. My protective rituals continue more from habit than necessity now, integrated into daily routines that provide comfort rather than responding to immediate threat. The experience changed me in subtle ways. I've become more attentive to intuitive warnings, more willing to act decisively when something feels wrong, rather than seeking rational justification first. This heightened awareness occasionally creates tension. Michael sometimes gently teases me about becoming the family psychic, but has also prevented several potential mishaps when I've insisted on changing plans based on inexplicable discomfort. I've never researched the specific identity of what visited me those nights. Names have power, and I prefer to keep that particular knowledge at distance. Instead, I focus on the lesson learned. Some places retain impressions of their history in ways modern understanding cannot fully explain. Those of us who perceive these impressions must respect them, not out of fear, but acknowledgement of boundaries between different aspects of existence. Our family has taken many vacations since Idaho, creating joyful memories that far outweigh that single disturbing experience. We even camp occasionally, though always in populated areas with substantial artificial lighting. Last month, Michael mentioned possibly returning to Idaho this summer. Different location, different facilities, but the same general region. I considered it briefly before declining. Some geographic distances are worth maintaining, not from fear, but prudence. Whatever waited for me in the darkness at Evergreen Valley remains there still. I suspect watching other visitors, perhaps testing them as it tested me. I hope they recognize the warning signs more quickly than I did, and respect the ancient boundary between observation and invitation. For my part, I've learned to appreciate the comfortable predictability of well-lit hotel rooms, with their absence of history and their promise of undisturbed sleep, a simple luxury whose value I never fully understood until those 3 nights in Idaho. It was October 12, 2018, when everything I understood about reality began to unravel. The autumn air carried a peculiar sharpness that evening, as I prepared for what should have been a routine hunting excursion on my family's rural property in Western Virginia. At 32 years old, I'd walked these woods countless times since childhood, but nothing had prepared me for what I would encounter. I got a late start that evening, slipping into my old hunting clothes and grabbing the single-shot 20 gauge from its usual spot by the door. The night sky was pitch black, no moon, no distant glow from any town. Out here, you rely on your own eyes, maybe a weak flashlight if you're lucky. I remember thinking it felt unusually still, like all the wildlife had decided to bed down early. Normally the crickets would be a steady chorus, and occasionally I'd catch an owl calling in the distance. That night I barely heard anything. I led the hounds out, 2 young ones still learning the ropes. They were excitable, but reliable enough to sniff out a raccoon or even a stray deer if they were in the mood. They usually dashed into the brush, yipping and yapping, but this time they were dead quiet. I chalked it up to them not catching a scent yet. We set off along the edge of the property, heading for a familiar spot near a little stream. Our property bordered several hundred acres of national forest land, creating an expansive wilderness that few people ventured into after dark. The darkness between the trees seemed more absolute than usual, as if the night had physical weight and substance. I kept my flashlight beam low, preserving my natural night vision and avoiding spooking potential game. The dogs, normally vibrant and eager, padded alongside me with an unusual reluctance. Rusty, the older of the two, kept glancing back toward the house, while Scout maintained an uncharacteristic proximity to my legs. Their behavior should have been my first warning that something wasn't right, but I dismissed it as a temporary quirk of their training. As we ventured deeper into the familiar woods, I found myself straining to hear the usual nocturnal sounds. The rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, the distant hooting of owls, the whisper of wind through the trees. Instead, the silence pressed in, creating a vacuum that made each footfall sound unnaturally loud against the forest floor. My boots crunched through the undergrowth, and I noticed that each step sounded louder than normal. After a good 20 minutes of slow walking, I realized we hadn't heard a single bark. Usually, even if they were on a wrong trail, they'd make some racket. I whistled. Nothing. I tried calling them by name, still nothing. A tightness settled in my gut. I kept going, stepping over fallen branches and pushing aside tangles of weeds, hoping to see a flash of fur, hoping they'd burst out barking like they were just playing a trick on me. The silence hung like a thick curtain. The shadows between the trees seemed to deepen as I moved forward, creating disorienting patterns that played tricks on my vision. Several times I paused, convinced I'd seen movement in my peripheral vision, only to find nothing but still branches when I turned to look. The forest had never felt so alien, so hostile. I paused to check my watch. 8:45 p.m. Not particularly late for a hunting trip, but the darkness and silence made it feel like the dead of night. I pulled out my thermos and took a long sip of coffee, hoping the familiar ritual would settle my growing unease. The warm liquid did little to dispel the coldness that had settled in my chest. The dogs had disappeared completely now. I called their names repeatedly, my voice sounding flat and muffled in the dense air. No answering barks came. No rustling of undergrowth announced their return. For the first time in all my years of hunting these woods, I felt a profound sense of isolation. I decided to head toward higher ground, thinking perhaps I could spot the dogs from an elevated position. The ridge that ran along the western boundary of our property offered a good vantage point over several acres of forest and field. As I climbed, the silence grew even more pronounced, as if sound itself was being actively suppressed by some unseen force. At the top of the ridge, I stopped to catch my breath. My flashlight beam seemed weaker up here, barely penetrating the darkness beyond a few feet. I turned in a slow circle, sweeping the light across the familiar landscape now rendered strange and threatening by the night. No glowing eyes reflected back, no movement caught my attention. The dogs were gone, and an increasing sense of dread was building inside me. There came a point where I decided to cut through a small patch of waist-high brush toward a cow pasture. From there, I could skirt around to the next hollow and keep an eye out for the dogs. My breathing had become shallow, my heart rate elevated not from exertion but from a growing, inexplicable fear. As soon as I stepped into that open field, I stopped dead in my tracks. Across the ridge that ran parallel to the field, an intense red glow spread out, drenching everything in this unreal color. It wasn't flickering. It wasn't pulsing. It just bathed the entire tree line in crimson. At first my head tried to rationalize it. Maybe the farmer was having a bonfire or some kind of brush clearing burn. But if that was the case, I would have smelled smoke or seen sparks. This glow looked almost too pure, and it stretched for way too long a distance. I was far enough away that I couldn't make out details, just the scarlet shade crawling across the treetops. My pulse hammered as I realized there was no flicker, no crackle, no smell at all. I fumbled with my shotgun, popping out the birdshot shell and loading a slug. It felt silly. Who loads slugs to investigate a weird light? But my instincts were screaming that something about this wasn't right. I knew no one would be out here with a massive bank of red lights, especially not this deep off the road. It almost felt like I was seeing the horizon dyed in blood. For a moment, I debated marching right up that ridge to see who or what was causing it. My legs felt numb, torn between curiosity and a prickling sense of danger. I could practically taste my own fear. The risk of running into something beyond my comprehension kept me rooted in place. The light remained, constant, neither brightening nor dimming, illuminating the ridge in a way that defied natural explanation. It didn't behave like firelight, headlights, or any artificial illumination I'd ever encountered. The trees stood in stark silhouette against the red backdrop, their branches reaching upward like supplicant hands. I raised my shotgun, not to fire, but as a gesture of self-reassurance. The metal felt cold against my sweating palms. I estimated the distance to the illuminated ridge at approximately 500 yards, too far to approach without committing to a lengthy trek through dense undergrowth. Time seemed to suspend itself as I stood transfixed by the unnatural display. Minutes might have passed, or perhaps an hour. I couldn't tell. The normal markers of passing time, changing shadows, moving clouds, shifting stars, seemed irrelevant against the steady, unwavering crimson glow. I attempted to document the phenomenon, pulling out my phone to record video, but the screen showed only blackness where the light should have been. I tried taking photographs with the same result. The camera captured nothing but ordinary darkness where my eyes perceived that terrible red illumination. Finally, self-preservation took over. There are times to be bold, and there are times to get the hell out of there. I opted for the latter. Keeping my flashlight off, I turned around slowly, trying not to make a sound. The brush rustled beneath my feet. Leaves crackled, and every little noise made me flinch. The only thought in my mind was getting back home before that red glow moved or spread, or whatever an otherworldly light might do. Each step away from the phenomenon brought equal measures of relief and dread. Relief at increasing the distance between myself and the inexplicable light, but dread that something might be following me through the darkness. I found myself stopping frequently to listen, holding my breath to better detect any sounds of pursuit. The forest that had earlier seemed unnaturally silent now filled with subtle noises. The creak of branches overhead, the distant rustling that might have been small animals or something else entirely. My imagination transformed every natural sound into a potential threat, every shadow into a lurking presence. I abandoned any pretense of stealth, prioritizing speed over silence. Branches whipped against my face as I moved, but I barely registered the sting. The path that had taken nearly an hour to traverse initially now passed in what seemed like minutes, adrenaline propelling me forward with singular purpose. When the lights of our farmhouse finally appeared through the trees, I nearly wept with relief. The familiar structure represented safety, normality, a refuge from the incomprehensible thing I'd witnessed in the forest. My breathing came in ragged gasps as I emerged from the tree line and crossed the open yard. By the time I stumbled onto our porch, my breath was ragged and my hands were shaking. My mom and stepdad were inside, not even looking up from the kitchen table when I started babbling about the red glow. They'd heard plenty of wild hunting stories over the years, and probably assumed this was another tall tale. They scolded me instead, demanding to know why I ditched the hounds out in the woods. I tried explaining, but words failed. Eventually I fell quiet, realizing I wouldn't get any sympathy or understanding that night. The dogs found their way home by dawn, looking spooked and refusing to leave their shelter. I noticed they wouldn't make eye contact with me, as if ashamed or frightened. Their behavior only reinforced my certainty that something truly abnormal had occurred in the woods. I spent the morning drinking coffee and replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out how a bonfire could appear so solid, or how a glow that strong could vanish by sunrise. There had to be some trace, a scorched field, a line of tire tracks, something, but I already suspected I'd find nothing. That unsettling red light became the only thing on my mind. I barely slept after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd picture the treetops drenched in that fiery red glow, spreading across the ridge like some silent warning. By morning, I'd worked myself up enough to decide I had to go back and see if there was anything at all, that could prove what I'd witnessed. Once the sun rose high enough to brighten the woods, I headed out. Instead of the shotgun, I brought my backpack stuffed with snacks, water, and a cheap camera I'd borrowed from a friend. I wanted evidence. The morning was crisp and clear, with sunlight filtering through the canopy and casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Everything looked normal, disturbingly normal, as if the previous night's experience had been nothing but a vivid hallucination. The dogs refused to accompany me despite my encouragement. They whined and retreated to their kennel when I approached with their leads. Their continued fear strengthened my resolve. Animals often sense things humans cannot, and their behavior confirmed that something genuine had occurred. My breath quickened the closer I got to that pasture. I kept expecting to see scorched grass or some sign of a makeshift campfire, yet everything seemed normal. The grass was damp but green, No tire tracks, no scorching, no burned-out logs. The birds were chirping. The breeze rustled the leaves. It felt maddeningly ordinary, as if the night before had been an illusion. I paced around the area, snapping photos of the ground, the trees, the sky, anything that might capture some subtle clue. At one point I knelt and tried to see if the soil was disturbed, but it just crumbled between my fingers like regular old dirt. No footprints I couldn't explain. No broken branches to suggest someone had hauled in a generator or floodlights. If anything, it was too pristine, which fueled my frustration. Systematic in my search, I widened my pattern, looking for anything anomalous. The ridge where the red light had appeared showed no signs of disturbance. No evidence of fire, no trampled vegetation, no discarded equipment. I climbed to the exact spot where the glow had seemed to emanate from, and found only undisturbed forest floor, fallen leaves, and the occasional animal track. A short walk away stood this abandoned pre-Civil War home, weathered boards sagging inward. Growing up, I'd heard rumors about it, whispers of odd lights in the windows, disembodied voices drifting across the yard at night. I'd always thought those stories were just tall tales to spook local kids. But right then, with my nerves already frayed, it felt like a natural next stop. The place looked deader than ever. Its front porch drooped, old shutters dangled from rusted hinges, and the windows were caked with dirt. I stepped onto the porch, half expecting it to collapse under my weight. A sharp creak made my heart jolt, but it held. Then I spotted something moving inside. At first I thought it could be an animal, but it disappeared too quickly, like a flicker of a silhouette that shouldn't have been there at all. I pressed my face to a broken window pane, but all I saw was a dim, empty hallway. A chill crawled across my skin. It felt like stepping into a vacuum. No birds sang. No breeze whistled through the cracks. It was the kind of silence that makes you suspect you're not entirely alone. Despite my better judgment, I tried the front door. The knob turned with surprising ease, and the door swung inward on hinges that made no sound. An oddity for such an old structure. The interior smelled of decay and something else, something chemical and unfamiliar. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the broken windows, creating the only movement in the still interior. The floorboards beneath my feet were solid despite their age, showing no signs of the rot that afflicted the exterior. I moved cautiously from room to room, noting the absence of graffiti, animal droppings, or other evidence of intrusion. The house seemed untouched, as if sealed in time since its abandonment decades earlier. In what must have been the dining room, I found a table with 4 chairs positioned as if awaiting dinner guests. No dust covered their surfaces. In the kitchen, a cast-iron skillet sat on the ancient stove, clean and rust-free. These details bothered me more than any supernatural encounter might have. The suggestion of recent habitation, of human presence where none should exist. The staircase leading to the second floor beckoned, but something warned me against ascending. Instead, I explored the main floor thoroughly, documenting everything with my camera. In the final room, presumably once a study, I discovered a single item out of place. A modern LED flashlight, its metal casing untarnished, placed carefully on the mantelpiece. I reached for it, then stopped myself, suddenly certain that touching it would be a grave mistake. I backed off before curiosity got me doing something reckless, like going upstairs or taking that flashlight. That old house had a heavy aura, and I was already wound tighter than a coiled spring. By the time I trudged back home, I was itching to tell someone, anyone, that there was no sign of a fire, no sign of headlights, nothing. But as soon as I walked through the door, my stepdad was there, pacing around, looking spooked. He locked eyes with me and blurted out he'd seen the light too. Except in his case, he'd been hunting in another hollow a couple miles away, waiting for the dogs to pick up a scent with his flashlight off. Out of nowhere, 3 flashes of red lit up the entire area, bright enough to reveal every tree trunk and leaf. Then it vanished, leaving him in darkness. I couldn't form a proper response beyond an open-mouthed stare. We both knew we weren't dealing with imagination. Hearing his story felt like validation. At least I wasn't going crazy. We spent the next couple of days calling around, talking to folks we trusted. Most had heard rumors of odd lights over the years, but no one had solid proof. A few suggested it might be military flares or experimental aircraft. Others hinted it was something not of this world. My stepdad and I weren't sure what to believe, but neither of us could shake the feeling that something was off in these woods. I started digging online whenever I could get to a place that had internet. Eventually, I stumbled upon a local message board with mention of a red light sighting about a decade earlier and 10 miles away. The poster talked about an object that hovered in one place, then shifted colors. It gave me goosebumps to read, partly because they described that same electric shade of red I had seen. I reached out to them, hoping for more details or pictures, but got only silence. That made my paranoia worse, like someone wanted to bury the story. The username hadn't been active on the forum for over 8 years, and all attempts to contact them through the site's messaging system went unanswered. Further research revealed scattered accounts of similar phenomena dating back decades in our region. A 1973 newspaper article described unexplained atmospheric illumination observed by multiple witnesses. A local history book mentioned red sky phenomena witnessed by settlers in the mid-1800s. These historical references lent credibility to our experience while simultaneously deepening the mystery. Whatever we had encountered had potentially been visiting this area for generations. At night, I found myself checking the window, waiting for a flash of crimson that never came. The hounds seemed skittish too. They'd circle the yard, whining, ears perked like they caught a scent of something in the distance. My stepdad slept with his shotgun resting against the wall. We didn't talk about it directly, but I could tell he was on edge, same as me. Friends started noticing I was quieter, more distracted. A couple of them teased me about chasing spooky lights, but the ones who really knew me could tell something had gotten under my skin. Finally, I mustered up the nerve to return to that pasture at dusk. My shotgun was slung across my back this time. I wasn't taking any chances. The walk felt twice as long as usual, and every rustle of wind in the trees made me grip the flashlight tighter. When I reached the pasture, I switched off my beam and waited. Minutes ticked by, stretching into an hour. The moon rose high, bathing the rolling hills in a faint glow. But no red light appeared, just silence and the distant call of a night bird. I positioned myself on a fallen log with clear sight lines to the ridge where I'd previously seen the phenomenon. This time I came prepared with a digital video camera, a compass, and a notepad for documenting observations. I waited with a patience born of determination, recording the time at 15-minute intervals and noting any changes in the environment. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath formed small clouds in the air, and a thin layer of frost began to form on the grass despite the season. This unexpected cold snap heightened my alertness. Something about the atmospheric conditions felt reminiscent of my previous encounter, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. At precisely 12:17 a.m., I noticed a subtle change. The nocturnal insects, which had been providing a constant background chorus, fell silent simultaneously. The abrupt cessation of sound created an unnatural void that seemed to press against my eardrums. I raised my camera, pointing it toward the ridge, finger poised over the record button. The minutes stretched on in this eerie silence. My muscles tensed with anticipation, eyes straining to detect any hint of that unearthly red glow. But despite the promising conditions, nothing materialized. Eventually, almost imperceptibly, the insects resumed their nighttime symphony and the moment of possibility passed. Eventually, the chill of the evening got to me, so I turned back, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. On the way home, I kept replaying the moment I'd first seen that bright glow. It felt as if something had crossed a line that night, like I'd witnessed a side of this land that wasn't meant for prying eyes. Even though I found no evidence this time around, I couldn't shake the sense that the light might reappear, maybe when I least expected it. Part of me wanted to unravel the mystery, to push harder, to investigate the old house, to scour every acre of that ridge. But another part whispered that maybe it was better not to know. Sometimes answers can make things worse. Still, as I walked up my porch steps, I decided I'd keep looking. If that eerie color ever spilled across the trees again, I would be ready to face whatever was out there, no matter what form it took. In the months that followed, I returned to that spot dozens of times. I installed trail cameras along the ridge and near the abandoned house. I interviewed elderly residents about local legends and historical oddities. I maintained meticulous records of weather conditions, lunar phases, and other potential variables. My obsession became a methodical quest for answers. The phenomenon never repeated itself during my vigilant observation, yet I occasionally heard whispered accounts of similar sightings elsewhere in the county. The red light, whatever its nature, seemed to appear on its own mysterious schedule, indifferent to human efforts to document it. I've come to accept that some mysteries resist resolution, existing in the liminal space between the known and unknown, but I remain watchful, my camera always ready, my mind open to possibilities beyond conventional explanation. The red glow altered my perception of reality permanently, leaving me with the unshakable certainty that our understanding of the natural world remains profoundly incomplete.